An inexplicable disease affecting the entire body came out of nowhere. No one knew how to get rid of this ailment. After infection, disgusting growths appeared on the body, after which the body became numb and turned to stone, and eventually it simply collapsed and turned to dust. Because of this disease, rumors began to spread that those who were sick were dealing with the devil himself. Those in whose families the sick were identified completely lost their status. The very existence of these people was under threat. The disease mowed down both ordinary peasants and high-ranking aristocrats. It did not care about status. Even for people like Karen Witta, the heroine of this story was very similar to the Duke's daughter, possessing light green hair and honey-colored eyes. It was the color of her eyes and hair that allowed her, a street ragamuffin, to become a replacement for the late Karen Witta. She was just a baby then when the Duke promised that if she could cope with the role of his daughter, she would never need anything. She had nothing to her name, and he, the richest man in the empire, offered her a deal. Then the little girl thought, did she really get a chance and let her brothers and sisters make fun of her? Let the servants not pay attention to her. Hope still lived in this girl, and she promised to play her role to the end. One day, her adoptive mother announced that she would marry the Grand Duke of Hexion, which was a great success for an illegitimate child, as she would receive nothing from her family anyway. All these years, our heroine considered herself a tramp picked up from the street. But it turns out she really was the daughter of a duke. However, for the daughter of a noble family, the wedding procession was very modest. In the carriage, the girls sadly thought that it would be better if she remained in ignorance. Everything was predetermined from the very beginning, and this marriage was— It was sad to realize that all this was part of her role. The servants whispered that Duke Hexion's face was covered with a huge scar. There were even rumors that the devil himself had cursed him. But the bride tried to reassure herself as best she could that everything would be fine and ordered herself to be strong. Perhaps she can now finally start a new life. She spent the last 10 years of her life in the duchy, so starting life from scratch will be difficult. Suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted by the neighing of horses. The carriage overturned. The girl was barely conscious. Her thoughts were only about getting out. One of the soldiers pulled her out. The rest stood nearby. Just when she thought that she had been saved and found, she saw that the guard was dead. Horror was reflected on her face. With a dry tongue, our heroine began to demand that she be released, appealing to the fact that she was the Duke's daughter. But the soldier grinned and called her a fake who talked too much. For the girl whom everyone knew as Karen, this was a shock. And these guys definitely can't be knights, given their manners and rude speech. She asked who they were and why they were wearing the armor of the Duke's knights. And the answer was that she was quite smart for someone who would soon die. Her head was spinning. They hadn't even had time to get married. Wasn't this marriage so necessary for the Duke and the imperial family to establish good relations? Until the Duke had another daughter, she could still be useful. While she frantically thought that the Duke would not benefit from her death, one of the knights dressed as a knight told her from the Duke that she had done an excellent job of her role. Then came death, before which the girl had time to think whether she had been too naive in dreaming of receiving at least a little love. After all, while he needed her, there was still such hope. Then, as a little girl, with all her childish sincerity, she wanted to help him as long as she could, and even though he doesn't consider her his own daughter, she wished for the fading consciousness to turn back time, let everything plunge into eternal darkness, behind which she heard someone calling Adele, after which the voice said that it was her time to turn back, and then she opened her eyes, hearing the chirping of birds and a bright light shining in her eyes. She stood up, trying to catch her breath and comprehend what had just happened. The maid Bella was chirping about how wonderful the weather was today. Her temples were throbbing, as if all this couldn't be real. Had she really managed to escape? Looking at her hand, she saw that the scar had disappeared. Bella reported that today, Mr. Paris is returning from the academy, so the lady needs to get ready quickly. The girl felt hot. Didn't Paris graduate from the academy 2 years ago? She seemed to be speechless and did not answer until the maid called her. Looking at Bella, our heroine shuddered even more, because she had also changed this uniform 2 years ago and asked the maid what year it was. She, of course, was clearly taken aback by such a question, but replied that it was now the 475th year since the creation of the great empire, and again began to rush to get ready. So our heroine realized that she had gone back in time 3 years ago. It was unrealistic, beyond all common sense, but everything points to the fact that time has turned back. All that remains is to accept this reality. In 3 years, she will leave this house for a political marriage, which means that next year, the heiress of this house, her sister, will be born. And when her sister appears, she herself will become unnecessary. And to prevent fate with a tragic ending from repeating itself, She must run away. For now, she played her assigned role as always. To please them, she tightens her corset and puts on a beautiful dress. And step by step, he moves towards these cold glances. Habitually wishing good morning to his mother and father, the mother looked at her with a cold gaze. There stands the older brother, also looking distantly. He doesn't respond to her greeting with a word. A minute later, he choked out a word and answered the question that they hadn't seen each other for a long time and, as always, didn't look into the eyes. Not only does he not look her in the eye, he doesn't even look her in the eye. But she doesn't care anymore. As far back as she can remember, he's always been like this. How often had she looked to him for support when she was being bullied by servants or other brothers, but he simply ignored her. Paris simply gave her a cold look, so why was she so desperate for their attention? After trying in vain to win her father's love, she died at his hands. He must have laughed at her stupidity for a long time. Now everything will be different. She will not play her role, and she bowed and said that she was not feeling well, so she would leave them. Previously, she had to sit at the table for up to 2 hours, but today she finished in 10 minutes, especially since it seems like they don't care. The girl remembered that it seemed that at this time of year, a hunting competition began. During the hunt, young ladies give colorful tassels decorated with beads and pearls. They give them to their suitors or knights to whom they show favor, so as not to arouse suspicion. It is worth doing everything as last time. Adele sadly remembered that she had never given this brush to anyone. Deciding that it should be given to the knight who had won last year, the girl decided that she needed to somehow leave the house unnoticed to go and buy these brushes. In general, our heroine's memories of this time are rather vague, so slipping past the servants, she aimed to put her thoughts in order. Before she could leave, Bella began looking for her, asking the servants where Mrs. Karen had gone. Seeing our heroine, her face distorted with anger, and she shouted that she had already searched. She read the one who had been portraying Karen, the Duke's late daughter, for years. The maid was indignant at who had allowed her to wander around the estate like that. Adele remembered how her whole life even the servants had treated her with disdain. One day she felt unwell, and Bella did not allow her to get up, saying that she had reported her condition to the Duke. Then the girl couldn't even get a word in edgewise, and Bella was so angry with her, saying that her whining was causing her nothing but trouble. It became so offensive, even in childhood there was not a drop of warmth from her. As a child, she often made her cry, and the girl decided that it was time to pay her back in the same coin. Our heroine looked at Bella and asked why she couldn't walk around the palace wherever she wanted. Bella seemed to explode, bawling that Karen was such a selfish person, and why should she explain such elementary things, and why she behaved like that in general. After waiting for Bella to calm down, Adele chuckled slightly, still maintaining the same even expression on her face. After which, in the same calm voice, she told Bella to close her mouth. And her next action was a hefty and resounding slap in the face as retribution for all the pain and humiliation since childhood. While a stunned Bella, wide-eyed and trying to comprehend what had just happened, she heard from our heroine that she should show more respect. The maid stared madly at Adele and screamed that her mistress was crazy. Adele declared that she was doing what she had always wanted to do, ordering Bella to kneel and beg for forgiveness. She would only give such an arrogant creature a chance once. The next stage of her new life was delicious food that made her heart beat faster. It had been so long since she had eaten such excellent food. At the Duke's house, Adele ate only salads all the time, because for some reason, any other food made her feel sick. The girl savored every bite, enjoying the wonderful food. She had already forgotten how delicious food could be, and when anything ever brought her pleasure. She decided for herself that, although it was dangerous, she no longer intended to play the role of Karen Witta. She had some savings which Adele decided to spend on food and various little things. Her imagination drew pictures of what she would do when she gained freedom, because she could open a restaurant, or even an inn. She could also become an archaeologist, but to do something like that, she needs to join the Adventurers Guild, and she needs to meet Jin, if he still remembers her. Once she gets out of here, many paths will open up for her. It's good that she devoted herself to her studies so much, as if her whole life depended on it. Foreign languages, ancient languages, and even pharmacology. As a child, she often got nosebleeds after fights. However, because of my studies, this happened for the first time. The girl kept telling herself that she needed to try harder. Even the butler, making his rounds late in the evening, was amazed that this child was studying at such a late hour. And for Adele, there was one constant intention that she should try. And every time she gave the Duke her work, her heart expected to hear that he was pleased. She looked at him with such hope, how she wanted him to recognize her as his daughter. The Duke didn't shout, didn't lose his temper. He simply looked at her with a phlegmatic gaze and said that even such a trifle was beyond her strength. He kept saying that he was disappointed, and the girl stood there looking downcast and depressed. Afterwards he left, simply closing the door. Now she understood how naive she had been. In her father's eyes, she did not live up to the status of his daughter, but he still allowed her to take part in the hunting competition. The girl was so happy and wanted to make the most beautiful tassels for her father and brother. She went to the store early to buy a popular color of tassels. She bought the most popular color and went home so inspired. In the end, she never managed to give them away. All the guests only whispered about her, the young daughter of the Witt family. Paris accepted many gifts from other ladies. People whispered that she had no one to give her brush to. Even family members did not accept her gift. That same day, she didn't even get a chance to catch a glimpse of her father. He was too busy. All these memories flashed through her mind when she once again went into the store to buy materials. The seller was upset because she had already sold all the most popular colors. Adele said that it wasn't that important. She didn't need beautiful ones. She asked to see everything that was left and, having touched the black material, decided that since the previous winner was wearing black armor, then black would be suitable. The girl asked to wrap 2 skeins of black. I also bought beads for decoration. The woman so sweetly asked her to wait while she prepared everything. Adele was taken aback. She wasn't used to being treated like that. She thanked me, and her heart felt so good. Our heroine returned home quite late. The Duke stood at the window all this time and watched her as she walked into the house. He noted to himself the changes in this girl. I remember Paris mentioned this recently when he asked if something had happened to her. But the Duke replied that absolutely nothing had happened. And now, standing by the window and watching Adele, he admitted that this child really was behaving strangely. Without turning around, he said that it seemed like she knew something. Bella stood, shaking and scared. The morning before the hunt arrived, a crew was already waiting for Adele. As she was going down, Bella called out to her. In an ingratiating tone, she said that the carriage was ready and asked permission to accompany him. Adele stopped and looked at the maid who was offering her help. Our heroine interpreted Bella's submissiveness as her decision to report everything to the Duke. Passing by, she said that she didn't need her help. All she has to do is grab the handle and walk inside. But for some reason, she became so uneasy, her face became covered in sweat. When she was already sitting inside, this familiar voice calling her Karen said that he was coming in. The girl saw the Duke in shock. The carriage started moving. He rode with it, and it was strange. Our heroine was nervous because of the Duke. Her heart was ready to jump out of her chest. She remembered the voices of her killers, the Duke's order to seize her, and what he asked to convey about her role. The man broke the silence and turned to her, asking if she was feeling unwell, and if so, she needed to call a doctor and adjust her treatment. Adele began to realize what was happening and replied that he shouldn't worry. She wasn't sick. In front of her sat the man on whose orders she died, who now said that she had not called him father lately. The girl replied that she was only showing him respect, because every time I call him father, I saw only his face filled with anger. The Duke brought up a topic of her strange behavior lately, that she was not like herself. Adele smiled and asked His Excellency how she usually behaved. They arrived in the forest of Fulheim, announced the arrival of the Duke, where every few years a grand hunting competition is held. Both the offspring of noble families and knights gather there. Adele turned her head, looking for the knight in black armor. Dressed like that, he should have stood out, but he was nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, my heart started beating wildly. It was him! He was in his black robes, tall and stately. The girl thought that perhaps the past had remained unchanged. For some reason, I really wanted him to pay attention to her. People walked back and forth, and Adele just stood there. Perhaps their eyes would meet. At this time, the Duke called her. Our heroine gasped and turned away for literally a second, but the knight in black was nowhere to be found. He seemed to have disappeared, dissolved into the crowd, and yet there was still hope that she would still have time to meet him before the end of the tournament. Turning to the Duke and calling him father, the girl asked if he had called her. The Duke looked at her suspiciously. Now this girl called him father again. The man's eyes narrowed, and he noted to himself that, as expected, she was quite smart. He added once again that she should devote herself entirely to her role and called her into the tent. During the hunting competition, the nobles live in tent camps decorated with the coats of arms of their families. That means she will have to spend her time in a tent with these people again. The girl thought sadly that she would have to endure all this for a whole week. At that moment, the maid called her and pointed to her tent. The maid reported that Mrs. Karen's mother had received a letter from Curran, who announced his return. This news seemed to burn Adele. That's right, she remembered it happened during the hunt. Curran returned just at the end of the competition. He was an outstanding swordsman mage, who mastered both magic and weapons perfectly. Kurin Vita, the second son of the Vita family. As a child, he always bullied her, once taking her pencil and saying that she had picked it up in the trash. The girl explained that she uses it during classes, but for him it was just an excuse. Kuran just went and broke it. He threw it on the floor and said that she should stop clinging to old things, and if she wanted that pencil so much, then let her pick it up and continue writing. And now Kuran had to return. How could she forget about it? Before she had time to tell Bella that she wanted to eat, the maid immediately ran to carry out the order, and Adele remembered their last meeting with her brother as if it had happened yesterday. She fidgeted and was terribly nervous when Kuran handed out the gifts. Knowing that she was afraid of him, he mockingly remarked that her beloved brother was giving her gifts, and she was trembling. What a shame. I had to force a tired smile and assure her that everything was fine and she liked it. He stated with satisfaction that this was better and called her a good girl. Adele stood there huddled up as if expecting to be hit by him, and her heart was pounding. Remembering that incident, the girl exhaled and grabbed her head, preparing for a new and at the same time old meeting, until the sheets of paper lying on the table flew down and she began to collect them. Adele's attention was drawn to the map. There were some notes there. She assumed they were for hunting. She got the idea to take them with her and take a good look at them. The hunt would end after noon. If she returned quietly, then no one would notice. The girl decided to quickly grab a pen and slip away so as not to run into the Duchess. Besides, it would be boring at the camp. At this moment, a bright light hit our heroine's eyes. The Duchess came in and looked at her intently. Noticing that the girl shuddered, the woman said that she looked as if she was hiding something and asked what she was planning. Adele was silent. Then the Duchess told her that she would not even greet her. The girl tried to crumple and discreetly hide the card and, without looking at the Duchess, said that she never liked greetings anyway. When the taken-aback woman asked again, Adele looked her in the eyes and said, "But isn't she right?" In response, the Duchess gave her a resounding slap. Our heroine almost choked, opened her mouth, and shouted at the Duchess to stop when she was about to leave the tent. But she pushed her away roughly and hit her again. And then she coldly told her not to dare to be insolent to her anymore. Adele was shaking all over and rubbing her cheek, which was red from the blow. She could only say that she would go and take a little walk, but she herself rushed to run as fast as she could. Not remembering how far she had run, Adele froze to catch her breath, choking on tears. Only after looking around did she discover that she was in the forest. Finally, she came to her senses. The forest really was magical, but blocking out the blinding stream of sun rays, she discovered a strange boulder. In front of her stood an obelisk covered with writing. It amazed her with its size, and it was marked on the map. Running her hand over it, she concluded that the writing was in an ancient language. She had no desire to return to the camp and began to copy the symbols from the obelisk. She had already managed to read some of them. Someone had left a message in the hope that these notes would be useful to someone. Adele also really wanted this. The girl came to her senses when the sun was already setting. It was already late, and it was time to return. Before she could take a step, she heard a growl behind her. All shaking with fear, she tried to find the source of the sound. She needed to run. Someone was approaching. But you can't really run in her shoes, so she decided to take them off. From the growling, she guessed that it was a wild animal, most likely a wolf. As soon as she took off her shoes, the wolf was already flying towards her, shaking everything with its growl. Adele turned around, realizing that she needed to run, but her body seemed not to obey. She slipped a little, and the beast's mouth was behind her. Having managed to look over her shoulder, she realized that she had made a mistake and lost time. He would soon be very close. She accelerated with all her might and immediately crashed into something hard and metallic. The knight in black armor pressed her to himself and covered her eyes with his hand. He stretched out his hand and stopped the rushing wolf. She stood there, barely breathing, unable to move from fear. When the knight removed his hand and said that she no longer had anything to worry about, the girl saw the same knight in black, and he declared that it was a great honor for him to meet Lady Karen. It was incredible to Adele that the knight had ended up here at such a late hour. He asked anxiously if she was okay, and the girl thanked her savior. The knight reported that everyone had found her, and that it was time for her to return to camp before night fell. The girl was completely confused by his question about what brought her into the thicket of the forest. She knew that he would ask this question, but he answered for her with the understanding that everyone should have time when they want to be alone. After which, the knight pointed to the road that would lead her to the camp. Adele asked anxiously, wouldn't he go with her? He replied evasively that he had to look around, and that he would visit her later, and told Lady Karen to return. Suddenly, it dawned on her that there was a brush and she could give it to him. Handing him the brush, she asked, looking at him with hope, whether he would accept it. It was the same tassel made of black material and decorated with pearls. The knight was surprised why she was giving him a brush, since they didn't even know each other. Adele didn't know what to answer, why she was giving it to him. He was like some person from another world to her. Because he remained in her memories, and even after returning from the past, she knew that he would become the winner of the hunt. But of course she couldn't tell him this. The girl replied that wouldn't refusing the lady's sincere favor discredit his knightly honor? He was silent for a while, and then agreed with her, after which he spread his arms and asked her to put the tassel on him. A wave of shock washed over Adele. She didn't understand how to put it on. Seeing her expression, the knight in black decided to clarify the tradition. After all, ladies put it on their chosen ones themselves. Our heroine felt like a fool. Of course he was completely right. Pulling herself together, she walked over and put on the tassel, saying that she would pray for his victory. He gallantly took her hand and kissed it, saying that in that case he would dedicate the victory to her. Adele seemed to be in a dream when the knight reminded her that it was time for her to return. Everyone was waiting for her. This man carefully held her and turned her in the right direction. Adele was still under the impression he didn't go anywhere, making it clear that he would watch until she found the right road. I didn't want to leave, as if I was waking up from a magical dream, but she had to obey, and the girl went to the camp. While she was walking, she turned around several times to see if he was standing there, and if this was all a dream. She was met by a frightened Bella, who started babbling about where she had disappeared to. Everyone was looking for her. Adele so wanted to return unnoticed, but now she realized that she was in big trouble. She was standing in a dirty and wrinkled dress, and Bella reported that the Duke was furious. She calmly walked past Bella, telling her to prepare a new dress, since this one was not suitable for hunting, and walked on as if nothing had happened. The Duke was waiting for her in his tent. Swallowing before this meeting, she asked permission for the late intrusion. The Duke ordered his knights to leave the tent, leaving him alone with his daughter. In cold notes that concealed barely controlled irritation, he asked her exactly what she was doing. All huddled up, but trying to speak as calmly as possible, Adele replied that she just wanted to take a short walk in the forest. The Duke, with a chuckle, sarcastically commented on her answer that the Duke's daughter went for a walk in the forest, and then suddenly disappeared, forcing the knights to search for her. Adele shrank from his gaze and words when he began to ask, grinning, what she had been doing before her little walk, whether she had been performing duties like Karen Witta. She replied that she was only doing what she thought was necessary, and the glass shattered in the Duke's hand, and the shards flew around with a crash, and he barked out what it meant. He continued to belittle her, saying that he considered her quite smart. But now he sees that it seems she has gone out of her mind, and how dare she hit Bella? The Duke accused Adele of becoming arrogant because of her role, and reminded her of how she ended up in Karen's place. As calmly as possible, our heroine answered, if she stops playing the role, won't this create problems for his lordship? The grin of her so-called father turned out to be unkind. With an evil hint, he told her that he believed that if he stopped playing his role, then he would simply gain freedom and do whatever he wanted. In which case, she would simply face death by starvation and nothing more. The Duke touched upon her childhood, poverty, hunger, and a fight over a moldy piece of bread from the garbage dump. In the end, he ordered her to know her place if she wanted to continue living the way she was living now, which meant she had to refrain from anything that would bring shame on their family. A broken plate followed, but Adele ordered herself to endure the Duke's shout, that if she understood him, then she would stop causing trouble. The girl only had to hold out for 1 year, and in the meantime, a knight in black was making his way through the darkness of the night. He was breathing heavily, his breath was caught, his legs refused to move. The body began to shake as if in a fever, and the man realized that it was spreading too quickly. Automatically, he grabbed the brush that the girl in the forest had given him, and the pain subsided. He looked at the little thing and whispered that it was because of it that the pain went away. Bella brought Adele a new dress for tomorrow, saying that the Duke himself chose it. Having seen the maid off, she plopped down tiredly on the bed. How tired she was after the day. Her gaze was drawn to her notebook lying nearby. Realizing that I needed a distraction, I decided to read the notes copied from the obelisk. The man wrote that he really hoped that someone would read his notes someday. He wrote that this was the history of the forest that he had been studying for so long. While Adele was reading this, she remembered that there was another excerpt from a fairy tale on the obelisk. It spoke of spirits that live deep within the forest, and from the hidden treasure of the ancient people. This is a place in which there is no end to the countless riches. As it turns out, somewhere there is a secret passage to the gnome village. Adele was so fascinated by this that she wanted to explore the entire forest if she had the chance. But I became scared when I remembered the terrible wolf. Her stomach twisted with fear. Today, she was on the verge of death. This had never happened before. Could it be that the future began to change because she was behaving differently? Everything was not like before her death, and falling asleep, she thought that she didn't want to die. Our heroine promised herself that she would never go into that forest again. But as soon as she closed her eyes, she immediately found herself in that forest. Or maybe it was the forest that was calling her. And so again she was dreaming about the forest, when she was once again called, addressed as Lady Wit. The honey-haired girl giggled and asked what she was so engrossed in. Lady Vita was usually involved in their general conversation, reminding that, as if a personal servant, she always performed on a whim. Adele rolled her eyes. This girl was behaving as usual, looking for a scandal. Lady Alia had the status of the biggest scandalist in noble circles. Although her father, the Marquis, was a respected nobleman, he had a lot of problems because of her, and Adele even felt a little sorry for him. And the girl who sat next to Lady Alia, Lady Euclid. 6 months later, he will fall ill and die from that same unknown disease. Adele thought that if she told her about her imminent death, she would stop wasting time. Then she asked herself, if she thinks about it, why does she behave the same way as these girls? Instead of escaping from my father's plans, wouldn't it be better to start somehow differently? She heard some sounds and turned her head towards the forest. Our heroine promised herself to go there one last time. After all, if she left now, people would not stop gossiping behind her back, and these pathetic rumors would never reach the Duke. So she stood up and said that she had to leave them. She had urgent matters to attend to. The obelisk attracted not only her. 2 people in black robes stopped in front of him, saying that the reports were correct, but what they really needed to find. And for some reason, the obelisk began to collapse, and now Adele found herself near it. The girl began to rewrite the notes. She only had to decipher the last part. She heard some sounds, and she turned around and listened. She didn't see anyone, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was nearby. I became scared. What if it was a wild animal again? She had the feeling that someone was watching her, and she decided not to make any unnecessary sounds. At that moment, a gloved hand fell on her shoulder. Adele jumped up and turned around with such a face that the knight in black standing there hastened to apologize, seeing how he had frightened her. Out of fear, the girl called him Sir Black Knight. He bowed, asking to accept his most sincere apologies. Then Adele began to justify herself that everything was fine. Adele decided to ask him what he was doing in the forest at such an hour. The man in the knight's costume replied that he had accidentally seen her, Lady Karen, going into the forest alone. In turn, Adele inquired whether he himself should not be in the hunting grounds right now. After all, this year he should become the winner. Has the future really changed because of her? This is of course not a significant change, but still. And then he confesses to her that he is more interested in her than in hunting grounds and hunting. Adele didn't understand what nonsense he was talking about, and asked if he hadn't sworn to dedicate his victory to her, hinting that the desire to win alone was not enough. He promised that he would do everything to not fall in the eyes of the lady. The knight apologized for disturbing her leisure time, and our heroine, in a businesslike tone, advised him to manage his time more rationally. She was sure that he had more important things to do. The man agreed that there were more important things to do. He wanted to look at the obelisk, and in response to the stunned Adelaide's words about the tournament, he innocently admitted that if she hadn't reminded him, he would have forgotten about it altogether. Still, the girl decided to get to the bottom of it. If competitions are held in this forest every year, then why was the obelisk of interest now? The knight responded that he had always believed that the purpose of this obelisk was to guide fellow travelers. Until that moment, he did not know that the letters on it were written in an ancient language, and in turn, he asked her because she was writing something in her notebook. Our heroine shuddered at his suspicions that she could read the ancient language. He assured that he did not doubt her abilities. It was just that no one could read it, since the language was very ancient. Adele assumed that she could tell him, so she carefully revealed that she had deciphered only a little. The knight asked her to tell him what she had already deciphered. Adele thought that there was nothing wrong with it, so why not tell him? The man who wrote on the obelisk reported that if this story was deciphered to the end, it would be considered fascinating. The writer believed that in this way, a person wants to study the forest. And even though he traveled a lot around the world and saw a lot in his life, it was this that brought him the greatest joy. The record of his entire life is on this stone. And if the reader is pure, he will be able to find all the obelisks. Then the dear reader will become a better storyteller and perhaps understand that the tale is a lie, but there is a hint in it. He also warned her never to anger the master of the forest. The girl wondered what kind of master of the forest he was, some kind of bear or something. They were silent for a while after that, and the knight in black said that he wanted to know the continuation, and he didn't even know that there were more obelisks in this forest. But Adele knew about it because they were marked on the map. However, she was only able to get here thanks to the hunting competition. Despite the fact that she also wanted to know the continuation of the story, there was no reason to look for the rest of the obelisks and put her life in danger. Of course, if it were up to her, she would return and confess to the knight that she knows the location of the other obelisks. And then he offered to visit the forest with him twice a month if she was as curious as he was. What he just said seemed to hit a sore spot. And what could she answer him? His pressure became stronger. He declared that he would protect her. Adele thanked him but refused, thinking that who she needed to protect herself from was him. A verbal altercation began between them, which ended in a draw. Still, barely containing her irritation, she asked why he was so interested in her, and it felt as if she had been fooled. The knight began to speak, but hesitated. The truthful answer was because she gave him a brush. This is what changed him that day. The symptoms of pain decreased. There was power in this hand, and he wanted to find the source of this power, and asked if Lady Karen made this hand with her own hands. A storm was raging inside Adele. She wanted to yell at him and say outright that he didn't like the gift. But instead, she giggled sweetly and confirmed that she had made it herself. The knight tried to find out if she had used any special materials, but our heroine replied that she had used ordinary ones from the store. Adele, barely containing her rage, hissed that she saw that her gift was not to someone's taste, but there was no need to worry, she did not curse him. The man frightenedly denied that he was talking about that at all, but all he said was that his heart fluttered at the thought that she cared about him. It was so unexpected that the girl was embarrassed that she had made up all sorts of things. But for her part, in order not to delude him, she explained that there was simply no one to give the gift to. So she chose him. Afterwards, she made an official curtsy and said goodbye. He stopped her by telling her what was wrong with his delusion. Pointing to his heart, he tried to explain everything that was happening. Adele's words made him shudder. The girl tried to explain that he had misunderstood everything, and she gave him the brush as a sign of gratitude. The man retorted that no one would just make a black brush for no reason, so he thought that Lady Vita had specifically chosen the color that he liked. It turns out he jumped to conclusions, Adele mentally gasped. How spot on. Then he turned to his horse and said dejectedly that he just wanted to look at the other obelisks with her. He thought that she would deign to do such a small thing, but apparently he was mistaken. Listening to him, Adele wanted to help, but at the same time, she was angry that he decided that, since he could ask, she would immediately run after him. Our heroine knew only one thing. This man would become the winner of the competition. Today is the last day of the competition. If he wants to win, he will have to try very hard. There is little time left until the end of the hunt, and even if he returns to the hunting grounds right now, it will not be so easy to make up for lost time. And looking at this knight who looks at her with all his might, begging her to agree to his request, he is not at all interested in the competition. Then Adele decided to make a deal of sorts. If he won, she would accompany him to the obelisks. He took the promise that Lady Vita would give herself to him for one day. In the camp, the men grumbled about what family this knight was from and were clearly depressed. It was possible to hear that this mysterious knight caught so many animals in 1 hour. At this time, the Duke appeared and called Adele. She pretended that the tea party had just come to an end. Both her brother and father said that it was time for everyone to return together, and the girl became gloomy at this prospect. Adele wanted to burst into tears. What a day this is! The brother glanced sideways and asked his father who this knight in black armor was. He was such a wonderful hunter. Having heard about her already familiar knight, the girl swallowed. But the Duke, to her great surprise, said that the most faithful thing would be to stay away from this knight, so as not to bring trouble upon herself. In a resigned tone, she muttered that perhaps she too should be wary of him. The Duke glanced at her, trying to understand what she was talking about, and then a nasty grin appeared on his face, which he accompanied with the words that, on the contrary, it would be useful for her to get to know him. The girl wondered what the Duke meant. The next day, the tournament host loudly announced that it was time to announce the winner. He shouted that this was the man who had caught a record amount of prey. The girls thought they were going to go deaf. This year's debutante and winner was Duke Hexio Militrio. He is also a knight in black. A silent scream escaped Adele. This is the same Hexion they wanted to marry her to. The Duchess then said that, for someone like her, this is a wonderful match. The very one who will become her husband in 3 years. Already now there is a murmur in the crowd that this knight is cursed, but the people fell silent when he looked in their direction. Adele stood as if petrified, while the knight meanwhile walked towards her under the gaze of the frozen spectators. Everyone became quiet, each looking at this mysterious knight with fear and curiosity. Our heroine realized that she needed to get out quickly and tried to squeeze through to the exit, but she had not managed to take even a couple of steps when she heard him address her as, "My lady." Now understanding for sure that he was coming towards her, kneeling before her, he said that it was time to put aside formalities. The only thing that saddened him was that she had forgotten about their agreement. Having handed her the trophy golden cup, the knight said loudly that he had fulfilled his promise. Adele stood and looked at him with wide eyes. Covered in more and more sweat, she forced out a crooked smile and words of gratitude, still marveling at the bizarre figure of the prize gift and wondering why he was giving the gift to her. Meanwhile, the host shouted out that it was time to end the ceremony with the winner's speech, and the knight said that it was time for him to go. Saying goodbye to his lady until we meet again, he went away, leaving Adele with the prize trophy. In an instant, Aaliyah was nearby, all fluttering from this picture. She rattled off that Lady Vita must be incredibly happy to receive the trophy from Duke Militrio, because everyone was simply taken aback by the fact that he chose her as his lady. Of course, she wanted to find out what Adele thought about the Grand Duke's illness that everyone was talking about, and whether the rumors about it bothered her. The first gossip's face became like a fish that was out of air when our heroine recalled how she had praised her knight, to whom she had given the brush, and for some reason was so confident of his victory. Adele found it so funny that she added that, of course, they didn't see the much-vaunted winner on stage, but a black knight. When Aaliyah came to her senses a little, she showered Adele with accusations that she dared to mock her, and in general that she allowed herself to do such things, accusing her of behaving arrogantly only because the Grand Duke gave her a trophy. Aaliyah was wailing loudly on purpose to attract attention. It was necessary to take measures, and the girl approached and leaned towards Aaliyah. She whispered in her ear what kind of drug they were delivering to her from abroad, and it really was that effective. As expected, Aaliyah was hit by a second wave of shock mixed with horror. Adele learned shortly before her death that Lady Aaliyah had been secretly purchasing opium from overseas. Just a year later, her growing addiction would drive the Marquis into bankruptcy. She felt genuinely sorry for him as a father, so she advised Lady Aaliyah to stop before it was too late. Aaliyah froze like a statue. Adele explained about the words, hinting that she understood everything. Adele saw how she shrank from shame and anger and waited for her answer. Instead of answering, she nodded and hurried away. It was a little shameful that she had brought Aaliyah to such a state, but Adele believed that it was for the good of Aaliyah and her father. In any case, she hoped that there would be no more conflicts with her. At this time, a speech from the winner was heard from the podium, who stated that for him, it was a mere trifle. Everyone, including Adele, clearly didn't get the speech they were expecting. The poor presenter hurried to escort the winner from the stands, nervously saying that he must have just been overtired. Adele came down and wanted only one thing: to rest. She was very tired that day. The events were very different from those in her past life, but that doesn't mean she expected them to repeat themselves. But who would have thought that she would meet her future husband? The Duke did not take his eyes off her, asking when she managed to fall into the favor of the Grand Duke. Our heroine became uneasy that the Duke was looking at her so suspiciously, and, as calmly as possible, explained that she had given him a brush and said a few words. Usually the Duke was only concerned with the reputation of their house, so it is unclear where such interest came from. The Grand Duke of Militrio is a man surrounded by rumors and gossip. He does not expose his skin even in the middle of summer, and also does not take off his gloves in order to hide his illness. Adele's fate was changing too quickly, and it frightened her. At this time, the Grand Duke Militrio arrived to the Duke. Adele felt a flush of heat. The Duke glanced coldly at her and gave the order to bring the guest. Our heroine did not understand what brought him here, and the Duke asked the same question. Then, a young man entered without a knight's helmet and simply replied that he had no business with the Duke. He had come to see Lady Vita. Adele's eyes bulged and her jaw dropped. Out of fear and nerves, she blurted out who he was, but the words flew out faster than she could think them through. It was obvious that he was the Grand Duke. The young man with brown eyes smiled cheerfully and joked that he was really so unrecognizable and that my lady was breaking his heart. The girl blushed, but the knight's manners had not changed at all. But she was struck by his appearance. It was not at all how she imagined him. To say that he was good-looking is to say nothing. Members of the Witt family were not deprived of beauty, but this man was on a completely different level. But for some reason, the rumors then ran counter to his real appearance. They called him the devil himself, and gossiped about the huge scar on his face. However, the Grand Duke also gave a reason. Wearing a cloak and gloves in winter and summer, such things were worn only if they wanted to hide their skin. Feeling how it trembled, the girl urged herself to calm down. She smiled warmly and replied that she did not recognize him because it was the first time she had seen him without a helmet and armor. Now it was Militrio's turn to be surprised, and after that, he simply invited her for a walk, to which Adele was taken aback, not understanding how he could just invite her to go for a walk, and asked again if he meant right now. The Duke stood with his eyes narrowed. He didn't like it, but he didn't think there was a hidden message in his guest's actions. Adele accepted his invitation, placing her hand in his, realizing that everything was only getting more complicated. The Duke said that he would be grateful if Duke Militrio returned his daughter to him before dark, otherwise rumors would spread. The young knight smiled and replied that it was impossible. They were just taking a short walk and talking, and he also asked the Duke not to pester him with his wishes in the future. And they went. What just happened was unthinkable. To say something like the Duke? Never before had she heard anyone talk to her father like that. While they were walking into the forest, Adele shared all this with him. The guy laughed and innocently admitted that he didn't like her father at all. There was truth in his words, and Adele understood it. It was just that he said it so bluntly. Along the way, he asked if the lady was at least interested in him now, but the girl did not support his ardor. This didn't bother him at all. At some point, he said that he didn't like that she called him Your Highness, and asked to just call him Hexion. This made her blush so much. Adele did not understand how a person could be so beautiful and irritating at the same time, and try to say as calmly as possible as the Duke wished. He continued to joke and reminded her that she would keep her promise, and she replied that she always keeps her promises. She is ready to devote all her free time to him, and she had no choice. She agreed to it herself. If only she had remembered earlier that the knight in black was the Grand Duke Militrio, she would never have agreed. But these memories were as if covered by a veil. His first appearance in society caused a great stir. A young man of unknown origin was granted the title of Duke. Rumors about the mysterious Duke spread throughout the empire, and some even said that he was the son of the emperor himself or his nephew. At the same time, with each of his appearances, he hid behind armor, especially his hands, which he never exposed. This was overgrown with rumors of a curse. Then she, the false Duchess Vida, was sold to him as a slave. Nobility was intoxicated. He owned large northern lands, however. There were those who were against the union of these two families. Adele analyzed that Duke Vida was the only one who wanted her death. Remembering those knights who killed her, Hexion frightened her with his laughing eyes. He was wondering what she was thinking about. Having said that nothing like that happened, she received a comment from her companion that his lady was a skilled liar. Our heroine muttered that the same could be said about him. The knight was curious. She was so willful. So why was she behaving so timidly in front of her father, hinting that she had clearly sinned against him in some way? This made her angry. She wanted to furiously attack him. What right did he have to dig into the affairs of another family and even ask about such things? Their eyes met. He seemed to be trying to read her thoughts. This man's laugh was so loud, his face became innocent when he swore that he couldn't read minds. Then he said that they would meet as soon as they decided on a date. At first, Adele replied that the date was not important to her, but then she came to her senses and added that next week would be good, and all because Karan was returning that week. If she scheduled a meeting with the Duke for that day, then perhaps she and Karan would not intersect, and Hexion did not care what the lady wanted. The young people agreed to meet early in the morning. She should bring all the materials for deciphering, and the Duke, with shining eyes, said that it would be great to have a picnic. Adele was taken aback when he said that she should prepare snacks for him personally, and he would do it for her. He was not embarrassed that neither she nor he knew how to cook. His enthusiasm told the Duke that it was worth trying, and then we would see. Besides, he suggested that it could serve them well in the future, and in general, it's fun to try something new. Still, Adele concluded that he was strange, preferring to drink tea. He said that he wanted to feed her so much. Our healer was surprised. Did he really want to cook the food himself? In the end, Hexion made her promise that she would eat all of his dishes, even if they were tasteless. She had to promise, but in the end, Adele decided that it wasn't fatal. By the way, he reminded that he allowed her to call him by his first name and asked her to honor him with this. The girl thought it was so absurd, but said that he could call her whatever he wanted. He knew her name. She doubted that he wanted to know her real name, and now it sounded like an empty phrase. The guy said thoughtfully that yes, he knew her name, but did she know why he wanted to hear it from her lips? Since Adele began to live as Karen Witta, the very mention of her true name lost all meaning. But for some reason, it was so hard to be called Karen. Because then, the Adele that she still keeps in her heart would disappear. And even though there is not a single person who calls her Adele, she keeps in her heart that orphan Adele who lived in the dark alleys. Nervously rubbing her temple, she remembered that in childhood, Karan also asked her name, but then she still considered herself an orphan. Seeing her nervousness, Hexion exhaled and said that he understood everything. And with a smile, he promised to see me next week. Or maybe even earlier. these words made Adele ask again. He waved his hand so that she wouldn't worry about it and gallantly thanked her for agreeing to his selfish proposal. When Adele left, he said goodbye until the evening banquet. The girl felt as if she had been bewitched. After all, this guy had a special charm, and Hexion thought about this girl. Thanks to her gift, he was able to get rid of the pain. Moreover, the intervals between attacks increased, and he managed to last a whole day without medication. With her, he felt alive, but at the same time, there was a feeling of loss, as if they had met before, a long time ago. The night shuddered in confusion, and the attack began again. The whole body began to tremble as if in a fever. He squeezed her gifted hand with all his strength, saying Karen's name. Adele was preparing for a banquet that she had completely forgotten about. The maids were preparing her for going out. Doing her hair, the Duke ordered everyone to leave and asked Adele what they had talked about with the Duke while they were walking. Our heroine tensed up, trying to answer as casually as possible that they had simply discussed the upcoming meeting. He asked what kind of meeting this was. The girl did not understand what was going on with him. Usually, he didn't care about anything except her role, and Adele said that he shouldn't worry. It was generally awkward to burden him with such insignificant things. From the cold grin and the Duke's words that if the meeting was so insignificant, then what made her blush? Adele blushed and began to sweat. His eyes were like ice floes piercing her. He demanded to know what he and the Grand Duke had talked about. The girl shook with rage at the words that if Hexion allowed himself to speak to him so insolently, then it was not just talk. Despite his threats that he would not repeat it twice, the girl calmly repeated that she had nothing more to tell. Even though Adele turned away, she was scared. She felt the malice with which he was looking at her. She remembered Hexion's words about how he didn't like her father at all. She realized that the Grand Duke despised her so-called father and tried to avoid him. And since she and Hexion are now on the same side, perhaps it's time for her to become bolder. And no matter how scared she was, the girl said as harshly as possible that she was trying her best to fulfill the role assigned to her, but she was not obliged to report on her every step. The Duke, after remaining silent for a while, replied that since she had the chance to meet the Grand Duke, she decided to be cheeky to her father. Here Adele was afraid that she had gone too far. Meanwhile, the Duke declared that since she dared to speak to him like that, it was time to teach her a lesson. What would have happened next if Paris hadn't come in and said that everyone was looking for the Duke in the banquet hall is unknown. But Adele sat frozen. The girl exhaled. How timely the banquet had begun. The Duke, leaving, menacingly muttered that the banquet was about to begin, warning her not to be late. Karen remained sitting there without turning around. It was very stuffy. But there was no time to waste. We had to go to the banquet. Otherwise, trouble was certain to happen. And yet she thought that maybe she would have time to take another walk when she heard some rustling. The girl began to look around feverishly. She managed to catch a glimpse of a black shadow flashing by. Adele shouted to the one who ran past. A few seconds later, strangers in robes began to emerge from behind the tents. The girl rushed about, not understanding who all these people were. The faces of these people were not visible. They did not talk but whispered among themselves and were tall. Adele went cold. Could these people really have come for her? She quickly remembered that everyone should be in the banquet hall. She needed to hurry. But these people surrounded her, not letting her leave. Our heroine, shaking with fear, told herself that they were still far away and would not attack directly at the camp. The image of when she was killed appeared before my eyes. The ground was slipping from under my feet. My head was pounding. Was she really destined to die again? But if they all attacked together, someone would definitely notice. And so the girl decided that they would not act that way. In an instant, she started running as fast as she could. Luckily for her, they didn't block the passage into the forest. The girl ran as fast as she could. The sun was already setting. If she could reach the forest, there were many places where she could hide. And even though there is a high chance of meeting the beast, she will be able to set it on these people. Adele kept telling herself that she could handle it because she knew this forest like the back of her hand, and she would no longer be a silent victim. People in black robes were heading after her. The sun had already set. One of them complained, thinking that the girl would be scared. But it turned out that still waters run deep. They discussed what to do next, whether to continue pursuing the girl or not, and in the end, they decided to leave. There was no point in wandering around at night. The strangers in black robes merged with the darkness of the night and disappeared. Adele only just started breathing. It seemed to her that she would simply suffocate. Her heart was almost jumping out of her chest. She managed to escape her pursuers, but she went too far into the forest. It didn't look like she was being followed, but her outfit was all wrinkled. Her hair was disheveled, and she even managed to lose her shawl. The girl froze when she heard some rustling. Besides this, there was some kind of glow. Adele walked towards this light, making her way through the tree branches, and discovered that the glow was coming from the obelisk. It was incredible. For some time, our heroine stood motionless, mesmerized by this unusual phenomenon. All the symbols on the stone acquired bizarre outlines and glowed. Coming closer, Adele at first thought that it was some kind of luminous paint. But no, the paint shines much brighter, and the letters became much more visible. What surprised her was that the first line had changed, as could text carved in stone change. The girl could not take her eyes off this phenomenon, finding it simply amazing. The idea to translate now came to her mind, and she began to read something written about the night, stepping into the forest of Fulheim late at night. After this line, someone tapped her on the shoulder for the umpteenth time. She barked without turning around that she was busy, completely in ecstasy from what she saw on the obelisk. When it dawned on her that she was apparently not alone here, she turned around and screamed with a face distorted with horror, wondering who was there. Duke Hexion, standing and smiling as always, waved to her. To her next question about what he was doing here late at night, the knight replied that he had followed her, seeing how she was making her way late into the forest. Only now did Hexion notice that the girl was shaking, and her outfit did not match the weather of the forest night. He gallantly put his cloak on the girl, asking that he didn't know that they would meet like this before the scheduled hour, but why she didn't warn him that she would go into the forest. When he said that this made him sad, the girl commented that many things made him sad. Hexion chuckled and admitted it was his weakness that showed up when she was around. While they were apologizing to each other, Adele noticed that the man was not moving his left hand. I remembered the rumors that whoever saw the Grand Duke's left hand would meet a sad end, and since no one had seen it, the rumors continued to grow. They also said that his hand was injured in an accident. Adele didn't notice how intently she was staring at his hand until he asked if she found his left hand interesting. Seeing her confusion, Hexion told her what he knew about the rumors. He was very curious by nature, and since it was she and no one else, he put his left hand on her hand. Adele gasped at the sensation. His hand was harder than stone. It was hard to believe that this hand belonged to a human. The guy naively assumed that it was a curse and asked, looking at Adele, if she was afraid of him. The girl gently removed his hand and honestly answered that she was not sure about it, and the knight admitted that he felt alive next to her. Our heroine blushed at this confession. Then he laughingly called it nonsense and asked her not to worry about it, asking if she had already translated the inscriptions on the stone. Before she could get angry that he was again avoiding the answer, she said that she hadn't finished yet. The inscriptions began to differ from those they had seen during the day. They started talking about the translation and the radiance. Hexion asked permission to look at the translation, and she invited him to sit on a stone. The man sat down on the stone gratefully. Adele began to look with her eyes for the lines where she stopped. Hexion kept his eyes on her, wondering why he felt so comfortable around her. He behaves differently with her than with others. He himself allowed her to touch his hand. If it had been anyone else, he would have already cut off his hands. When she touched the glove, his numb fingers felt warmth. He believed that it was somehow connected with the dreams he had begun to see the day before, and the ever-growing feeling of déjà vu. What secrets did this girl hide? Suddenly, Adele burst into loud laughter. Hexion reminded her that he also wanted to know what made her laugh so much. He joked that he was patiently waiting for her to leave him in the dark. Adele said cheerfully, "Did she really sadden him again?" Unable to contain his smile, Hexion jokingly admitted that he was now sadder than ever. They exchanged a few more jokes, and the girl said that she would read it for him. The man wrote that whoever is reading this now must have entered the forest at night, but he warns that Fulheim is much more dangerous at night than during the day, and these writings appeared at night, thanks to magic dust. When fairies bask in the moonlight, a mysterious substance accumulates in their bodies. With the exception of a safe zone at the entrance to the forest, the rest of the forest is their domain at night. It is the moonlight that opens the way for the fairies and awakens the master of the forest. Young people commented that the author constantly mentions the owner of the forest and that the atmosphere here has changed. The author shared that he was looking for something incredible here, but because of his curiosity, he let it slip out of his hands. He searched with all his might, but could not. That is why he decided to write the message in such a way that it could only be seen at night. Everything could have ended badly if the story became known to the world, and if someone finds out about everything, their life will be in danger, and by abusing this knowledge, everything can be turned upside down. Anyone curious enough can enter the forest at night, but if they are villains, they will only dig their own grave. Only to those who are pure in soul will the obelisk reveal its secret. Adele also spoke about a line in the middle that was difficult to read due to damage. The Duke admitted that the whole story was strange and that it worried him. They stood at the obelisk for some time. Suddenly, Hexion raised his left hand, asking if she liked translating the inscriptions, to which Adele looked at him in horror. The man noticed that, according to his observations, she was enjoying the process. This story is not like the fairy tales she once read, and our heroine admitted that he was right. Apparently, she had found her calling. He looked at her attentively, as if studying her. Adele blushed and asked what was wrong. Hexion replied that when she smiles, she truly becomes beautiful. The girl shuddered and looked at him menacingly. Our heroine argued that it was inappropriate to express herself in this way, but the Grand Duke did not understand why and did not see the problem. Afterwards, they stood in awkward silence. Then Hexion laughed. Adele constantly lost control around him, and it drove her crazy. Therefore, I decided to be on my guard at the same time the Duke suggested returning back separately. He remembered the banquet, which should have already come to an end. All Adele's sadness about the lost shawl was reflected on her face. Hexion guessed that she wouldn't be patted on the head for her absence from the banquet, and, extending his hand, suggested that they return together, using it as an excuse for missing the event. The girl thought sadly that it seemed she was destined to remain in his debt forever. As they were returning back, Hexion reminded them that next week they would go looking for the second obelisk. He shared his curiosity about whether the second one would also burn at night, and expressed the idea of staying in the forest overnight, accompanied by trusted people. Adele's eyes sparkled, and she asked if it was possible, although the Duke thought that she would refuse. Our heroine silently replied to herself that, in order not to see Quran, she would be ready to go to the ends of the earth, dreaming that Hexion would take her as an escort for a month. She expressed doubts about her father, but Hexion convinced her not to waste her energy talking to him. He would take care of that himself. Another weight was lifted from her shoulders. She had no desire to ask the Duke for anything, and wanted to return to the camp as soon as possible to prepare everything for the campaign. At least that's what she planned. Bella rushed to her call as fast as she could. The maid apologized and muttered that she wanted to wake her up. But the Grand Duke Milavito told her not to do this, and to wait until she woke up. Adele jumped up and widened her eyes, which meant that the Grand Duke had been waiting for her for over an hour. While the maid was remembering Adele's childhood and how she couldn't be woken up, our heroine jumped up like a soldier and ordered her to be collected as soon as possible. In her head, she went through the options for why he had arrived today if they had only met in the forest yesterday, and they had planned to go for the obelisk next week. Although she remembered his smile and the hint that perhaps they would meet earlier, she expected everything, but not that the meeting would be so early. Although she understood that she was in his debt, and, of course, there was a question why he came today when she was in such a state. Whatever will be, will be. But it was necessary to go out and greet the guest. As the girl descended, she heard the servants talking about the Duke's curse, and their fear that it would fall on them too. The servants were clearly nervous and frightened. Even Adele heard rumors about the lady. They said something about her childhood and the man who worked here. Then Adele barked, frightening the maids with her unexpected appearance. She declared that a respected guest had arrived to see them, and instead of greeting him, they were spreading gossip. While the girls were trying to explain themselves, Adele turned around and called Bella. She gave her the order to find the butler and punish the maids for their long tongues. The maids begged Bella to intercede for them and have mercy. Adele no longer intended to waste her energy on them. She had another goal. She approached Hexion and apologized for the long wait. He was polite and cheerful as always. Suddenly, his expression changed when he saw her in the daylight. Her face and how thin she had become. The Duke asked if she was getting enough sleep, and the girl nodded, keeping silent about the fact that she still had nightmares. Adele felt embarrassed for the servants, and she carefully asked if they had disturbed him. The guy laughed, calling it a trifle. He was used to it. Our heroine almost burst out laughing. Such things clearly shouldn't have been said with such a beaming smile. Although someone like him can regret anything he said, he simply closes his eyes to all the gossip. No matter what rumors surround him, he still remains a great duke. He has the authority and power that the emperor himself bestowed upon him. No matter how much Adele needed his help, she did not want to get closer to him. She decided that their relationship would end next week. She no longer wanted to be tied to this role, and she asked Hexion why he had come such a long way here. He called her lady, and it was clear that he was about to say something important. Our heroine literally froze when she heard his proposal to marry him. At first she asked again, looking at him with wide-open eyes, her head pulsating. Maybe this is a joke. However, Hexion was as serious as ever and looked at her expectantly. The girl said that he had stunned her with his proposal and called it an inappropriate joke for early in the morning. He carefully extended his hand to her face and said that she was being mistreated. The girl, nervous, screamed what he was even talking about. Our heroine turned away from him in an offended manner, declaring that she had had enough of his groundless insults. Hexion asked her if she didn't tremble at the mere mention of Duke Vita. He remembered that she asked to postpone their meeting for a week, so she herself was aware of how her shoulders were shaking. He also remembered the bruise on her neck during their first meeting, and how she tried to hide it with makeup. The way the Duke looks at her, and the way the Duchess looks at her. He became even more convinced of this when he arrived here. Even what he told the Duke about that day was not enough to justify her absence from the banquet. Adele had no answer to the question of when she managed to get hurt if there were no abrasions on her face in the forest. She didn't know what to say, feeling bitterness and shame. Hexion asked her as his lady not to lie in their defense, almost losing consciousness from his words, when he took her hand in his and promised to protect her. And he will fulfill everything she wishes. The Grand Duke stood before her and swore an oath to protect her from that moment until his death. Adele asked in a muffled voice why he was doing this. What was the benefit to him? But his only answer was the desire to stay by her side. Adele doubted whether she would be safe with him, because even at the banquet, danger awaited them. But he became the only person who extended a helping hand, and the girl wanted him to remain a savior in her memories. If she marries him as Karen Witta, the burden of this name will be with her until the end. But the girl did not want to be a burden to him, which she told him politely as she bowed out. He listened in surprise to her refusal and gratitude for caring for her, after which she asked to return to her estate. She stood huddled and motionless, because Hexion was in no hurry to leave. The knight knelt before her, calling her his lady. His voice was filled with warmth and affection. He said softly that he did not expect an answer from her right now. She certainly would not be a burden. Adele could no longer hold back her tears. The young man admitted that he only spoke about the feelings that overwhelmed him. Apparently that's why he started rushing things. But now it's time for him to go to the estate, wishing her a speedy recovery, and our heroine tensely wished him a good journey. They were supposed to meet next week, but as always, Hexion, smiling mysteriously, answered at the end that he thought they would meet earlier. Adele wanted to ask again what he meant, but she didn't have time. The knight's words did not seem strange to her. The very next morning, to her greatest amazement, Hexion was in their castle. He was beaming with happiness, saying that he had been waiting for her and asking her to sit down. The girl didn't even ask how long he waited for her this time, and only now it dawned on her that if he had been waiting for her all this time, then these people, the angry and tense faces of her family, were looking at her. It turns out that since he was waiting for her and didn't touch his plate, they were forced to wait for him all this time. He moved to sit next to her to make it more comfortable, and Adele didn't object at all. Hexion laughed and chatted, not paying attention to the atmosphere around him. Adele did not believe that he did not notice them. Everyone was on edge. They never missed a meal. Moreover, they never waited for her as long as she could remember living in this family. Still cheerful, Hexion suggested they begin their meal. While Adele still couldn't believe that she had witnessed such an event, he whispered to her that he had really tried hard. The knight's face shone and expressed such genuine warmth. Adele couldn't help but burst out laughing. The already angry Duchess irritably asked what business had brought the Duke to them at such an early hour. He ignored her question, saying how delicious the food was, and looked at Adele's plate. Hexion handed her a piece from his plate, but the girl, smiling tensely, said that what was on her plate was enough for her. He said simply that they say food tastes better when you share it, while the Duchess was barely able to contain her rage. And only now he pretended that it seemed to him as if the Duchess had asked some question. The Duchess, all twisted with indignation, reminded him that she had only asked a question politely, expecting a polite answer as expected by ethics. The Duke turned his face to her, making it clear that she should control herself. Smiling cheerfully, Hexion replied that only he decides with whom to be polite and with whom not. At this point, the Duchess's nerves couldn't take it anymore, and she screamed out that he was allowing himself to do this. And Hexion, ignoring her exclamation, said that yesterday he met with a young lady and proposed to her, but she refused him. He said this as if he was talking about the weather, and with a beaming face, he wanted to try his luck again. Adele didn't know where to look, and the Duke, with some fear, clarified what it meant that Karen had already received an offer. Adele firmly and categorically stated that she refused. Hexion nodded that he understood everything. What was done could not be undone. The Duchess could barely sit at the table, gritting her teeth from nausea, headache, and the surging irritation. Of course, now was not the best time to have a quiet breakfast. Looking at her plate, the girl wondered if she had ever had such delicious food on her plate before. And even though another scandal awaited her after the Grand Duke's departure, right now she wanted to eat. The knight seemed to understand what was driving her and asked her not to rush. Adele wished this moment would never end, but it was time to say goodbye. Our heroine expressed that he shouldn't come here for breakfast anymore and put on a show. He became sad for a moment, seriously considering her words. Afterwards, with a grin, he answered as his lady wished. Then, after her words, He left the estate with a sad expression on his face. Adele followed his carriage with her eyes, realizing how unenviable her situation was. Before she could take a breath, an alarmed Bella appeared and announced that Madame wanted to see Karen immediately. Adele trudged towards the Duchess's office and stopped in front of the door. The girl knocked and called her mother, although she knew that she hated it when Adele called her that. But now there were a lot of prying eyes. The Duchess raged and raged, ordering all the servants to get out and barking at Adele to come over and stop standing there like a statue. The girl approached, barely moving her legs, after which she raised her hand and hit Adele with all her might, causing her to stagger. In anger, she called Adele a rootless creature who dared to humiliate her. She screamed that since the Grand Duke favored her, she had completely lost all fear. A torrent of abuse flew at Adele, the Duchess calling her a pathetic nobody who hoped to change her status by marrying such a monster as the Duke. Adele knew the Duchess's character and mood well, and now she was losing her temper, and that was dangerous. Previously, she made a lot of efforts to win her stepmother's love, and at first the Duchess treated her with warmth, and then her attitude towards Adele changed with the snap of her fingers. The woman must have found out that Adele was her husband's illegitimate daughter, an illegitimate daughter who appeared in her house. Adele was expecting a new blow from the Duchess, maddened with rage, accusing the girl of being a creature who did not appreciate gratitude. For the first time, Adele grabbed her hand and loudly asked her to face the truth. The Duchess's eyes stared at Adele with a fury that also flashed with surprise at such a rebuff from someone who had silently endured everything. Our heroine tried hard to get through to her stepmother, asking who was to blame for this madness. She, who was adopted to become a puppet, or the madam, who found out something she shouldn't have known. The girl gave a speech in which she called both herself and the Duchess victims, and since she cannot take out her anger on the true culprit, she takes it out on Adele. It seemed that madness was raging in the Duchess's eyes, and her consciousness refused to accept the words of this girl. But still, biting her lip, the woman removed her hand and turned away. Adele understood how terrible this woman's life was, and even in the future, her rage would not subside. She even felt sorry for the Duchess, and silently said that she was leaving. Her stepmother, quietly and calmly trying to imitate anger that was no longer there, called Adele a bad girl and asked her not to stay up late, emphasizing that this did not mean that she liked her. Coming out of her room, she saw a familiar smiling face. Adele, in fact, was no longer surprised. Didn't she talk about breakfast? But Hexion didn't let her finish, arguing that since she didn't give him the opportunity to be present during breakfast, he decided to visit at least during lunch. The girl thought nervously that he had decided to come here every day, but the Duke and Duchess clearly didn't like it. The next day, Hexion showed up in the evening, and the next day he also came with a bouquet of flowers. The next day was also illuminated by his presence. So Hexion came for 60 days in a row, and Adele already perceived him as a member of the family. At one meal, he reminded her of her promise. While Adele was trying to figure out what kind of promise it was if they saw each other every day, the Duchess, nervous, thinner, and in a bad mood as always, was taking medicine for her stomach. The knight playfully declared that a promise is a promise, and casually asked if she would like to marry him today. Patiently exhaling, the girl reminded him of the refusal, but this did not bother her gentleman in the least. Adele saw that his presence and behavior were becoming habitual, and she wondered if this was normal at all. Our heroine looked at the Duchess, who had changed a lot during the time that the Grand Duke had been here. The woman looked simply terrible, being subjected to Hexion's endless attacks. She believed that the Grand Duke began to behave so aggressively towards her stepmother after he saw the marks on Adele's face. Lost in thought, she shuddered at the voice of the guy who addressed her. Pointing to her cheek, he noticed that the piece of rosy bun that had recently stuck to her face had disappeared. The Duchess shuddered and looked at her plate, from where the rosy bun had disappeared. It turns out that he quietly snatched the plate from under the Duchess's nose and placed it in front of Adele, and lectured the Duchess about the harm it would do to her stomach. Trembling with hatred, she could hardly restrain herself from attacking Hexion, who was pretending to be casual. Adele sat crimson, while Hexion sang a laudatory ode to the baker. The maid was bringing a new dish, and the Grand Duke couldn't stop talking about the Duchess's excess weight and the extra work for the cook. The Duke slapped himself in the face in frustration. Hexion pierced him with his gaze and asked if he didn't agree. The answer was a look ready to tear Hexion to pieces. Adele watched quietly as the Duke was seething with rage, but did not dare to answer. But still, this whole situation was to Adele's liking. The day of the appointed meeting with Hexion arrived. Adele came down early in the morning. Karan was supposed to return in the morning, but she didn't want to cross paths with him. She had had another nightmare last night and was still haunted by an unpleasant feeling. The girl didn't have to wait long. Her knight had already arrived. Our heroine's mouth dropped open in surprise. Firstly, he arrived early, and secondly, his whole face was red. For the first time, the man admitted that he was going for a walk with someone. He was worried that he would be late, but here he is. Adele took his hands and said that they were so cold. How long had he been waiting for her? He said that they agreed to meet in the morning, but did not specify the time. The girl's eyes widened, not believing that he had come here at 5 in the morning, and now it was already 7:30 in the morning. Hexion admitted that he was as nervous as a child and could not sleep. Adele suggested warming up first before going anywhere. Like a child with shining eyes, the guy clarified with him. Adele nodded. Her plans were to go to a restaurant and have breakfast. Then, the guy happily announced that he had brought food with him. When she asked if he had prepared everything himself, Hexion nodded with a sparkling expression on his face. Only when he pointed to the standing horse did the girl see what a huge box was tied to it. To her stupefaction, he simply explained that he didn't know what food she preferred, and therefore he had grabbed everything. She was shocked not only by the fact that all this food was intended for the two of them, but also by the fact that he had not slept at all. Seeing his face, she added to herself that she was not praising him at all, so stop glowing with pride. Just as she was about to suggest that they take a rest, since he was tired, Hexion asked his lady to go into the forest and that they would eat there. The girl was worried that he was very cold, although the knight brushed it off, saying that this was normal for him. Having said that he was indeed fine, Hexion glanced sideways at the light rustling. People in black robes were watching them. The young people set off on their journey, and upon arrival, Hexion, as always, carefully helped Adele get off her horse. He asked if her guards would follow them. The girl asked again in bewilderment about the guard. She had arrived alone. The Grand Duke realized that these were not Adele's father's people, and Adele herself looked around. She found herself in the forest again. But to get here, she had to travel a long way. What's even more surprising is that they got here faster than by carriage. Hexion took out the basket and asked if his lady would mind having breakfast first. Adele smiled. He must really be looking forward to showing off his culinary skills. She was really hungry and didn't mind the knight's offer to have a snack at all. The basket was really huge, and it looked like the Duke had put everything he could into it. Therefore, the girl thanked her companion. Hexion himself carefully emptied everything from the basket. He asked if this would be enough until tomorrow morning. Adele glanced around. This would be enough for a month, not to mention until the next morning. But she still couldn't help but notice how neatly the sandwiches were cut. He had prepared them superbly. Still, Adele clarified whether it was he who said that he would prepare a variety of food. The guy proudly replied that she was absolutely right. There were a variety of sandwiches here, with ham, meat, a variety of vegetables, even with eggs and jam. They also had bread, fruits, and fruit wine. After all, the Grand Duke had gone so far as to prepare all of this with his own hands. She should be grateful. After chewing a piece, the girl exhaled how delicious it was. This was the best compliment for Hexion, who asked to eat more. Everything was more delicious than she could have imagined. Because of the problems with his left hand, it was obviously difficult for him to cook all this. Meanwhile, Hexion asked to treat herself to fruit wine. Those puppy eyes of his seemed to be begging for praise, and it was already tiring her a little. There was a feeling of annoyance that she could not show even a bit of such feelings. Taking the glass, she asked if this was really Rudolph's fruit wine. The young man smiled. He was pleased and surprised that she knew about this. This wine had been aged for 5 years, since there was little rainfall that year, and the apples were unusually sweet. Our heroine began to taste the wine. If this wine was indeed made at that time, then it is the same wine that won the Golden Drop Award that year for its amazing taste. They started talking about wine. Adele knew that even not every high-ranking nobleman had such an easy time getting it, but Hexion, out of modesty, said that he grabbed the first thing that was in his cellar. He said that when it comes to capital, they are obliged to take risks and put it into circulation in order to increase it. But if we talk about wine, its taste and value only increase with age, and when it becomes extremely rare, there can be no talk of price. The girl called him a financial manipulator, because of whom one bottle costs 5,000. Therefore, he expressed his opinion that the status of power is useful. This applies to both the Grand Duke and the ladies of the ducal house. The topic of this status, giving the opportunity to spend money well and for one's own pleasure, moved on to Hexion, asking Adele whether she considers her relatives a worthy family. The girl responded by asking what he wanted to hear from her. The knight was worried that she was not appreciated enough. Therefore, he stated that if they do not respect her, then she has the right to respond to them in the same coin. And if one day her situation begins to weigh on her, His house is always open to her, he said so touchingly that he would always wait for her response to his marriage proposal. This touched Adele's heartstrings, but at the same time, the tension grew as he continued to raise the topic. After which, the knight asked if she was going to start deciphering. The girl was impatient to begin. She had already spent a lot of time resting. The young man stood up and declared that while she was deciphering, he would clean everything up here. As she walked away, Adele looked back at him. One question was bothering her, so, plucking up her courage, she asked why he never called her by her name. His response was a smile, and the words that she never gave her name. He amazed her more and more with his insight, and our heroine began deciphering the second obelisk, which, unlike the first, was in good condition. The girl was so immersed in deciphering that she didn't notice the knight watching her. He noticed that her decryption speed had increased, but what was even more surprising was her ability to decrypt without any notes. Hexion was dying of curiosity, so Adele read to him that the first obelisk was only an introduction. The author of this obelisk wrote that since the one who got here deciphered this part, he definitely intended to set out on the journey. The Forest of Fulheim is also called the Abode of Gifts, and to this day, there are corners in it unknown to man. When he asked what was next, the girl said seriously that she couldn't do everything at once, that she needed to concentrate. Hexion admired her. She really was an amazing person. The man, looking at Adele with fascination, began to say that she was definitely for him. The girl finished his sentence for him, saying that he liked her, and the Grand Duke reacted with eyes full of horror and a scream. And the young knight screamed because his lady disappeared in literally a split second. He frantically looked around at the clearing where they had recently had breakfast. Near the obelisk, the girl seemed to have disappeared into thin air. Hecleans was able to find her tracks near the obelisk, but they ended. No matter how much Adele looked for her, she was nowhere to be found. There were still her fingerprints on the obelisk, and, strangely, Hexion could still feel her presence. He was sure that she had been here just recently. The girl's trace disappeared exactly where he last saw her, and before she disappeared, the Duke did not feel any traces of teleportation magic. My head was torn apart by thoughts of what could have happened. At this time, Adele stood and looked at Hexion, who was pale, anxious, and nervous, and could not understand anything. She smiled and said that she was standing right in front of him. Why swear like that? Our heroine didn't understand why he was behaving so strangely. Did he really not see her, or was he simply ignoring her? While Hexion was wandering around the clearing, she timidly tried to attract attention to the fact that she was standing there. Finally, the girl thought that this joke had already gone far enough, and seriously and loudly called on the knight to stop. She reached out to touch him, and felt herself being hit with energy. It was then that she finally realized that something was clearly wrong. Her hand recoiled and could not touch Hexion. I decided to try again. The same thing happened as last time. Whenever she wanted to touch him, her hand was pulled back, as if by some kind of energy barrier. Adele's expression sank, wondering if it was a barrier or something else, but Hexion really couldn't see her. Then she swallowed, and a glow surrounded her hand. Soon she noticed that she was able to touch the tree next to which she stood, and the glow that surrounded her resembled an obelisk glowing at night. And after her, there were still traces left on the grass, which means it's possible that this is connected to the obelisk. Our heroine began to flip through the notebook to understand where she finished translating. The author called the part of the forest where the obelisk was located a forest of hallucinations, or a forest of visions. Firstly, it cannot be forgotten because its very existence defies any explanation. Adele froze, trying to understand why this forest was called the Forest of Visions. The girl held her notebook with trembling hands and read about hallucinations. They are what is mentioned on the obelisk. It should say here how to dispel them. It was necessary to decipher the obelisk faster. Adele was afraid that Hexion would believe that she was not here and leave this place. But even if he continues to look for her, it is dangerous here when night falls. Remembering that terrible wolf, she realized that visions do not affect everyone here. Shaking with fear, she realized that the animals apparently were not susceptible to this magic. Her hands were shaking, she had no concentration, and she could not find an answer. She translated incorrectly, but how can one understand where exactly she made a mistake? The girl sighed. What difficult letters these are! Trying to control her breathing and calm down, Adele told herself that there was still time. Hexion was still here. If she could decipher it, she would definitely find the answer. A line was missing where it was written about the place of visions that the author mentioned. The girl finished the part that she missed in the translation, because it turns people into unknown creatures. And again she was thrown into a fever. Unknown creatures. But what if she herself is no longer human? Now it was clear why she could no longer touch Hexion. Fear paralyzed her again. And if she would never be the same again, the fear was dispelled by a deafening scream right next to her ear. It was Hexion yelling where his lady was, calling Adele. He was so close, but he didn't see that she was standing right next to him. The knight himself, as he had expected, had disappeared somewhere, and he was trying to figure out what he had missed. His thoughts took him to stories about this forest. People said that people often disappear here, and therefore entry is prohibited during competitions. Since there were other places available for hunting, he never thought about entering here. Hexion considered stories about missing people to be stupid rumors, and he had also read something similar. There was one document that describes a case where a man returned a year after suddenly disappearing, who said that he saw the heavens, so there was no need for food, clothing, there were no wars, civil strife, but this man was alone there. Once someone gets there, he will be left alone, which means that being in the same place as others, the latter cannot contact you. He felt lightness throughout his body. The last time this happened was when she stood next to him. Hexion felt how the pain in his heart and the left side of his body noticeably weakened, and the knight said out loud, addressing Adele, that he would stand still. Hexion didn't believe in the reasons, and he wasn't given the opportunity to know them. All he could do was hope. The guy spoke to Adele, asking if she could hear him. While Adele tried to shout to him, Hexion calmly said that the high probability of this phenomenon was inscribed on the obelisk. Addressing the girl, the knight expressed confidence that she also understood this, and therefore it was only necessary to decipher what was inscribed on the obelisk. He promised that while she was deciphering, he would wait here for her. There was still time. Without her signal, he would not move from this place. Time passed. Hexion sat on a stump, bent over from the fatigue of waiting. He was so sure that she was here, but admitting to himself, the man understood that he simply had no choice to think differently. Adele stood and listened to him without the opportunity to change anything. She was also tormented by doubts about whether she would be able to decipher the obelisk and get out of this mess. Hexion, like her, tried to calm himself down and get into a positive mood, but hours passed, and he was tormented by doubts about what to do. If she didn't give a signal by the end of the day, then was it worth looking for someone who could decipher the runes? But then many would find out about this obelisk. From this helplessness, his head was splitting, and the man cursed. Suddenly he jumped up as his body began to tremble. It was as if my breath had been caught, and a noticeable pain began in my chest. Hexion was tormented by guilt and anger at himself. He shouldn't have let go of her hand. The knight was tormented by worries about his lady. Adele, hearing him, appreciated the pompous speech he delivered, but she understood that he was having a very hard time and was afraid. She needed to hurry up and translate everything, but Hexion's intense gaze made her feel uneasy. It was strange because, for some reason, the girl felt lighter. She was translating a text that said that the impossible becomes possible. The author wrote that the Forest of Visions is a special place where all fantasies and desires are destined to come true. He assured that they will be like a breath of fresh air for a tired traveler. But one should not forget one fact. The author reported that he had been exploring this place for a long time. Adele froze with a look of amazement on her face. It turns out that the answer to this riddle can be found on this obelisk. Again and again, our heroine urged herself to calm down, even though much of what she had written had been lost due to the destruction of the obelisk, and it looked like it would take much longer than she had expected. The girl tensed up and heard someone's cry in her ear that a person had been carried into the interworld. Adele's gaze fell upon a strange creature hovering in the air. She flew around Adele, who had grown cold from the old man, with curiosity. Adele tried to squeeze out a word, but her tongue wouldn't obey, and the creature hissed angrily, accusing the girl of wanting to call her a beetle. The hovering creature pounced on Adele, screeching so loudly that the girl thought she would lose her hearing. It screamed that it had just seen her and was immediately rude. Although Adele was scared, she noted that this little thing was so small, but so fierce. The creature's body radiated light. It looked like a fairy tale creature, and she blurted out, addressing the creature, "Is she really a fairy?" She arrogantly folded her arms across her chest and squeaked, "That's what the little people call them." Adele was amazed that fairies exist, and one of them was flying in front of her. She asked a second question, which meant the fairy could see her too. And the fairy herself doubted the adequacy of the person standing in front of her because of the stupid questions. She looked at Adele, calling her strange, and in turn asked if she was sure she was human. The fairy looked at the obelisk and stated that it seemed to protect her, asking if Adele had been in this forest before. Our heroine replied that of course she had looked, but the fairy clarified about the thicket of the forest itself. Adele admitted that she had never been in the thicket itself, and the fairy stated that it was very strange. Our heroine froze at the words of this creature, which means that she came to decipher the obelisk. So young and can already decipher the writings of Haxenlight. The name of the hero, Haxenlight, a man who accomplished many feats for the sake of his people, began to spin in my head. One of the legends even says that he defeated a demon. They say he was a friend of the first emperor and built a country for him, and that it was he who cleared the lands of the empire of monsters so that the common people could live there. It turns out that the person who carved the letters on this obelisk was Haxenlight himself. Adele was delighted with such an amazing person who left such a magnificent legacy. But her words did not give the fairy anything. She knew nothing about human tales, but she remembered that when this man came here, he said that he did not need any rewards for his actions. Our heroine was surprised that the fairy spoke as if Haxenlight had come here yesterday, although in fact centuries had passed. Suddenly, the fairy pointed at Hexion and asked Adele if he was Adele's companion. The girl blushed, remembering Hexion. The fairy noticed this and began to praise the knight. What a wonderful guy he was! Didn't Adele want to return to him? Hearing the word return, Adele cried out with hope, asking if the fairy knew how to do this. The new acquaintance peeked out shyly from behind the obelisk and offered Adele a deal. If she moved the obelisk, she would tell her how to get out. Our heroine was satisfied with this. Adele began to translate, and the fairy told her that many years ago, a man ended up in the interworld. He turned out to be the first person who could move between this world and the world of people. The creature spoke about this man, at the end, dreamily adding, obviously with love for Haxenlight, that this is how they met him. The girl noticed that the fairy clearly missed him, but then she pulled herself together, asking what she was thinking about. It was interesting with the fairy, of course, but she needed to translate quickly. Several hours passed. The fairy already began to yawn. She came to her senses when Adele, tired but happy, announced that she had finally translated everything. The creature began to circle around, asking to read, but Adele suggested an easier way to simply show the notes so that she could read them herself. She folded her arms at her sides and muttered that she didn't know the human language, reminding him that the girl herself hadn't been speaking a human language all this time, and how could anyone understand her scribbles anyway? Adele was shocked by this news. All this time here in the interworld, she spoke the language of fairies. It turns out that here she is not a person. Then she said in confusion that it would take a long time to read, looking at the tired and dejected Hexion. But the fairy indignantly teased Adele that she had spent all her strength on translating the text. Then she offered a new deal. If Adele read the translation notes, she would make sure that this guy, pointing to the Duke, would be crazy about Adele. The fairy believed that this was exactly what Adele wanted, and our heroine blushed upon hearing this. She awkwardly asked again why all this, but the fairy clarified that she didn't like this boy. But after a couple of seconds, she winked slyly and added that if you don't like this one, you can make any other one go crazy. It was incredible, but this little one could control the minds of other people, and to offer such a thing to Adele was a generous act of generosity. Trying to answer as politely as possible, the girl explained that she didn't think she needed that. The fairy looked confused and muttered that she thought she would definitely like it, repeating once again that Adele was strange, however. Still, the fairy couldn't calm down, asking what Adele wanted. Our heroine was very tired, but she understood that this creature wouldn't just leave her alone. But she couldn't offend her, so she offered to read. The fairy simply beamed with happiness at this proposal, but Adele made her promise that she wouldn't be angry no matter what she said. The fairy was very surprised by this condition, asking why she would be angry. Keeping calm, Adele answered silently that there were many reasons to be angry, but said out loud that the decryption contained information for people. We decided that the fairy wouldn't be angry. Adele said that she would read it as quickly as possible. The only thought in her head was to give a signal to Hexion before dark. The reading of the translation began with the entry that the interworld is a place connecting the world of people and the world of fairies. This is the true kingdom of the fairies, but sometimes people invaded their domain. However, only those who feel their mana are capable of this. So far, the fairy agreed with everything written, and also with the fact that Haxenlight has studied this place well. People who at least once crossed the threshold of the fairy realm were called boundary crossers. However, many people at first simply thought that they had lost their way. Haxenlight himself wrote that he himself had lost his way many times. The man described fairies as cruel and treacherous creatures, devoid of moral principles. But this does not mean that you cannot interact with them. Sometimes they like to charm people, but among them there are those who enjoy human suffering. For them, it's nothing more than an empty joke. This place will seem like paradise to anyone who gets there. The main thing is to find the right path. The fairy exploded from such a description of her kind, calling Haxenlight a complete scoundrel. Even if he had already kicked the bucket, she squealed. Well, who is the scoundrel here? She circled and screamed that even now she couldn't give him a punch. Adele was silent, realizing that the creature had lost its temper, but the girl continued reading the translation. The author wrote that the journey would never know obstacles. Anyone who entered would always be able to find their way back from the fairy kingdom. To do this, it was only necessary to touch another person, but Adele did not understand how, since she was precisely the one who could not touch the Duke. But there was a note that it might still happen if it is not possible to touch the person. Another option was the opportunity to taste human food. Adele froze when she saw the baskets and food on the blanket. If she can eat the sandwich, she thinks she can come back. When she was silent, the fairy asked if Adele had finished reading yet. The girl came to her senses and shouted that there was still a little bit left. The author also gave advice that if a person decided to go to the kingdom of fairies, he needed to find a flower and eat it. However, Haxenlight warned that before going into the Interworld, one must check that there is nothing from the human world. But if one manages to leave the world of fairies, the person who has been in the Interworld will still be able to see fairies. And if you manage to make friends with a fairy, she will help you return back. Fairies live in this world forever, but this does not mean that they cannot die. The author admitted that he lied to them when he promised that he would stay with them forever. Therefore, if he fails to apologize to them, he will forever reproach himself. Listening to these words, the fairy became sad. Our heroine concluded that she was quite close to Haxenlight, but that's not all. He wrote that various paths can lead a person into the Interworld. It could be a search for fairies, or a desire to find all the obelisks. But whatever the desire, you must definitely make friends with the fairies. The girl fell silent. The coordinates of the third obelisk were still indicated there, but the last mark worried Adele, namely that when night falls, you can meet a creature with scarlet eyes. Here, it was said to close her eyes. Adele certainly stated that she needed to remember this. The fairy asked all this impatiently, and Adele confirmed that this was all she had managed to decipher the obelisk. The fairy's small hand pointed at Adele, and the creature declared that in gratitude for the text, she would give Adele a gift. The girl didn't have time to ask what the gift was. The fairy had already blown some magic dust on her. Shimmering particles surrounded the girl, penetrating her entire body. She began to rub her eyes, not understanding what it was. The fairy said that now Adele is under the protection of the obelisk. It will be useful for her. When the girl asked again what she meant, the pleased fairy replied that Adele now had the power of healing, but warned her not to use it on others. Our heroine looked at the fairy in surprise, not understanding what all this meant. She did not feel any changes in herself. She glanced sideways at the sandwich that was worth trying to eat. She managed to touch it and lift it. After taking a bite, she saw Hexion looking straight at her and screaming. She chewed silently, already accustomed to being invisible to him. Suddenly, she saw that the glow surrounding her body had disappeared. The knight watched her appearance with fascination. In an impulse, he reached out his hand to touch her, to check that she was not a hallucination. Their hands touched. Saying that his lady was here, the man tightly squeezed the girl's hand, afraid that she would disappear again. He shouted that he was so glad that she was okay. Hexion talked and talked, spilling out emotions about how he was worried that he had lost her forever. But since the pain in his heart subsided, she was here. He admitted that he didn't even take medication. He didn't want to lose hope, because he believed that his pain would show her the way. Adele listened to him, not believing that they were talking like this. In a fit of emotion, the girl placed her hand on him to make sure that what was happening was real, embarrassing Hexion. She stumbled awkwardly and fell into his arms. The girl felt how tired and exhausted she was during the day, and also this existence of fairies, but the truth about them was truly frightening. Rubbing her eyes, Adele was glad how good it was that she would not be able to see this fairy again, but her joy was short-lived. A familiar voice squeaked that she was back. Alive and well, the girl's jaw dropped. She saw her recent acquaintance. The fairy exclaimed with joy. What happiness that Adele could see her again. The little creature grinned and reminded her of her gift, the blessing of the fairies. It was all because of him. Adele was completely confused. If she returned to her world, then why was she still seeing fairies? But that was not all. She was able to see other things. For example, the writing on the obelisk, which could only be seen under the moonlight. Our heroine staggered and asked again about the blessing, and about the fact that now she would always be able to see fairies. Giggling with joy, the fairy confirmed that it was not only fairies, but other creatures as well. From now on, Adele will see at night as if it were day. With his own strength, he will be able to defeat the wizard. Listening to this, Adele became more and more horrified. And the fairy, seeing her face, asked if she was not happy. She didn't want to see what others couldn't see. But at that moment, Hexion called her, alarmed that his lady was pale as a sheet and talking to someone. The girl wondered if she would tell him if he would believe her. On the other hand, the fairy squealed, asking what was wrong with her. Wasn't she happy with such a gift? Then, a strong gust of wind came out of nowhere. The fairy lost control of herself, saying that she didn't even remember being so kind to anyone. The wind almost knocked her off her feet. The girl covered her face with her hands and wondered if this was all the work of a fairy. Hexion saw nothing around him and did not understand where this gust of wind came from, but he knew that his lady was in danger. He ran up to the girl and tried to grab her hand. Afterwards, the beam moved towards them, and he covered her with himself. Adele gasped as she heard the blow that Hexion took. Having come to her simplest, the fairy herself did not understand how she had lost her temper, and contemptuously said that people were so ungrateful. Adele asked the knight if he was okay. He said he was fine, and his gaze fell on his bare arm. The girl froze when she saw her. His hand was indeed made of stone. The fairy grimaced in disgust, asking where this terrible smell was coming from, whether it was from a person. Hexion frantically hid his hand under his clothes. The pale young man apologized to Adele for making her see something terrible. The girl remained silent. She was truly impressed. The fairy inserted something that resembled a side effect of Bale's poison. Adele turned to her and asked again what kind of poison it was. The fairy noted that it was so long ago, and our heroine hopefully asked if she could heal Hexen. Nervously, she asked again. She can, right? Finally, the fairy answered, to heal this stone hand, and then reminded that Adele herself received the gift of healing. And the more obelisks she transfers, the stronger her ability will be. The girl, shocked by such news, asked again if she had gained special power, and the fairy said that, in any case, that's what Hansenlight called it. Ancient artifacts can have amazing power. Hexion, embarrassed, hid his stone hand and thanked her for telling him. And Adele kept thinking about the glow that had recently surrounded her, and whether it was somehow connected with the obelisk. The girl nervously thanked the fairy for such a gift, but this was too much. The fairy blossomed with gratitude, until Adele squeezed out a request to take this gift back. The fairy again became gloomy and angry. She could not take back the gift, since it merged with Adele's body, and in general, she noticed that the girl was not particularly happy. Adele herself summed up that now she would see such things for the rest of her life. The creature arrogantly folded her arms and emphasized that, by the way, the gift was very useful. For example, Adele could walk at night without any problems, even see fairies. Isn't that amazing? When our heroine almost burst into tears, what should she do now? She screamed, "What a strange man this is, and why should she explain everything?" Then the girl asked how she could use the obelisk's blessing. Haxenlight wrote that this was the key to making wishes come true, and the fairy knew nothing more. But she was sure that if Adele deciphered the rest of the obelisks, she would find out how, because Haxenlight always said that he would leave this place only after he wrote all his knowledge on the obelisks, and she expressed the opinion that Adele must already know about this, after which she flapped her wings and flew away. Adele called her again. There was a lot to find out, but she wished her luck and disappeared. Hexion asked who she had just spoken to. She admitted that she was with the fairy lady, asking how he ended up there. Of course, the Duke didn't see anything, and he was surprised that the gust of wind was created by a fairy. But Adele, smiling nervously, said that the fairy had already flown away. The girl approached Hexion without taking her eyes off his hand. He felt heavy and awkward, but he only muttered that it wasn't contagious. Then our heroine asked permission to look at his hand. He asked if she wasn't disgusted by the urging not to hide her true feelings. Carefully placing her hand on his, Adele calmly said that she understood how anxious he was. She felt the same. Raising her eyes to him, she asked him once again to show her hand. Taking his stone hand, the girl felt the color and texture of the stone. Then she asked him if it hurt. Without looking at her, the man answered dully that everything was fine, after which he admitted that yes, it hurt. Adele realized that he had finally opened up to her. She really wanted to help him. If at that moment the fairy asked for a wish, she could have made a wish to heal his hand. Taking his stone hand in hers, the girl wanted with all her heart to heal him. If only she had such power. At that moment, a glow began to emanate from her hands and move to the knight's stone hand. Hexion stared at the phenomenon without blinking. Adele herself stared in shock at what was happening. For a moment, the stone retreated, and she saw his normal hand, but this lasted for a split second, after which the hand became stone again. Even though it was all for a moment, Hexion was able to feel his fingers. The sensitivity had returned. Even now, while taking the medicine, he could barely move his hand, and the tips of his fingers were numb like a corpse. He could feel them. Alarmed, Hexian asked Adele what just happened. The girl conveyed the fairy's words that she had gained superpowers. Thanks to her ability to heal, she believes she can help him. The knight exclaimed, "Even if she lives for this, is it really all because of his illness, Carlet?" The girl, reeling in horror, asked again about the name of the disease, and the guy explained that that was what it was called. After all, it was from this disease that the real Karen Witta died. Adele found it hard to breathe and asked him to repeat why he was in this situation. Hexion wanted to tell her the truth, but was it only because they had similar fates? But he didn't want her to see him as a monster. If this girl helps him, he will finally be able to gain freedom, freeing himself from the Emperor's grip, and he decided to tell her the story, warning that it would take a long time, and began to tell her what she already knew about the Witta family, which is a devoted supporter of the Emperor. While the Emperor needed the Duke's support, their alliance was planned for years to come, and it seemed the alliance was unbreakable. But 10 years ago, an incident occurred that forced Duke Witt to kneel before the Emperor. He asked the Emperor to find a doctor who would heal his daughter from a fatal illness. The girl was overcome with fever. 10 years ago, she herself found herself in the clutches of the Duke. Hexion watched with alarm as Adele's face changed. There was no point in hiding it anymore, and our heroine quietly said, "He apparently already knows who she is, since he told this story." The knight admitted that he had known about her existence for a long time, and he also knew about the true nature of his illness. The man then asked Adele if she knew about their long-standing relationship. The girl asked again, and he explained about the political marriage. A heavy silence fell. Adele didn't think that the conversation would turn to this topic. Meanwhile, Hexion slowly continued to talk about how 10 years ago, everyone decided to turn a blind eye to the death of the real Karen Witta, who died from Carlet's illness, and then introduced Adele as her replacement. In order to connect two puppets together, Adele almost lost consciousness 10 years ago. This means that she was abandoned because of the birth of her younger sister, and their marriage was not arranged anyhow. Everything was predetermined 10 years ago. Then, another question immediately arose. Why was she killed? Because they found a more successful replacement. The girl was shaking as if in a fever. She didn't know anything at all, naively believing that she just needed to run away before her younger sister was born, and that there is only one step left to gain complete freedom. But it turns out that from the very beginning, this was an unrealizable dream. She did not even understand that she had long ago become a toy. Hexion watched Adele with regret. Afterwards, he quietly added that he himself only wanted to receive the Emperor's love. That is why he swore eternal loyalty to him, and when he agreed to drink the poison, he showed his true face. So the man sadly added that they would go down the same path. That's why she can cry in front of him without holding back. No matter how bad the girl felt, she clenched her teeth and decided that she would no longer cry because of her family, nor because of the situation she found herself in. So the knight opened his mouth in surprise when he heard that she was okay. She looked at him with a determined gaze, smiled, and replied that she would shed her tears only when she found her own happiness. This girl never ceased to amaze him, and Hexion said with pride that he thought his lady was truly beautiful. Adele looked down in embarrassment. The Duke understood that she was still stronger than him. Inside him, there was an impulse. Could he really reveal his secret to her? And he asked if she knew who he was. Our heroine blinked and replied that he was a Grand Duke, a descendant of the imperial family. But the man revealed that he was actually the result of an affair between the Emperor and a gypsy woman, an illegitimate child who had been forgotten by everyone and abandoned by his own father. Her heart fluttered. It turned out that both she and he shared the same fate, and in order to stay alive, Hexion had to beg the Emperor on his knees for mercy. According to the Duke, this lasted until yesterday. Now he wants to change the course of the game. He offered her to help him and work together. Our heroine asked doubtfully what use she would be and why he told her all this. The knight explained that thanks to her power, she would be able to save him, and he would no longer have to grovel before the Emperor. Every 6 hours he had to take the medicine given by the Emperor, otherwise it became difficult to breathe. Taking her hand, he said that he had not needed medication for the last 12 hours. He no longer feels pain, and all because his lady is next to him. The girl jumped back in shame. She didn't do anything. What does he mean? She was just there. He smiled charmingly and found it wonderful. Remembering her words about the fairy who gave her power, he knows nothing about it, but believes that his lady can save him. Hexion himself promised to help her in turn, because in the future it might happen that the Emperor would order her to be killed. The knight anxiously shared that this was possible, since for the last few years His Majesty had doubted the strength of Duke Witt. After all, when the Emperor got rid of her, he would have a chance to frame Duke Wit. He will definitely make you pay for the failed alliance. Only in this way will he be able to finally subjugate the Duke's family. Hexion didn't know the full details of the plan, but the outcome could already be predicted. Our heroine was horrified and angry. It turns out the Duke is not the only one who wants her dead, and the Emperor is a treacherous man who doesn't trust anyone. The knight sadly added that for him, the lives of other people were nothing more than toys. There was a pause as the young people stood trying to collect their thoughts. Hexion took her hand and admitted that he would very much like to know her name. Adele didn't know what to say or why now. He was always curious, and besides, he shared his secret. And if he began to call her by her real name to the Duke and the Emperor, wouldn't it become doubly difficult? Still, the girl did not understand whether knowing her name was really such a big deal. He assured that there was not a drop of lie in his words. Everything he said came from his heart, and the Duke promised that it would continue this way. Adele was grateful to him for such words, and yet her heart was still uneasy. Hexion simply offered her to use it to take revenge on her enemies, because from now on, they could rely on each other. Bitterness pierced his heart. The girl quietly muttered that this was why he proposed to her, but Hexion began to explain that it was not only that. She made him feel alive again. Remembering their first meeting, he admitted that it felt like he met a dear person after a long separation. Even when she is next to him, he worries if everything is okay with her. That's why he visited her every day, and still felt uneasy in his heart. The knight, as if in support of his intentions, squeezed her hand tightly. In addition, the man admitted that he was unhappy. When she is not with him, the Duke spoke touchingly and sincerely. Adele stood there confused. He, as before, said that he missed her. But even though he knows about her now, this doesn't mean that you should believe everything he says. In that future, when she dies, it was he who agreed to the political marriage proposed by the Emperor. And if he hadn't done this, she wouldn't have been killed on the way to the residence. She didn't understand anything at that time. But did he know about the impending tragedy? But his eyes looking at her now said that he didn't know. However, is it possible that Hexiona changed because they met earlier than then? Our heroine was in doubt whether her powers or his feelings were to blame, or perhaps she influenced fate. A hope was born in her heart that maybe her future would change too. The man's face changed when the girl said that her name was Adele, after which his face filled with tenderness, and he repeated her name. Then the girl asked how she could be useful to him in the future. She would not mind signing a contract. Hexion became serious again and asked her to marry him, until they get rid of their enemies, or until the time comes when it becomes unbearable for her and she wants to leave. He promised to protect her and give her freedom. Imagine the knight's surprise when Adele agreed. She agreed to marry and promised to trust him. In a fit of rage, Hexion hugged her so tightly that our heroine gasped in surprise. He pressed her even tighter, and Adele felt pain. When she made a sound of nervous confusion, he let her go. Turning away his embarrassed face, the guy said that he was so happy. Adele herself blushed, but she didn't understand why he was so happy. Hexion changed the subject by asking about the obelisk, whether she would wait until dark, but the girl replied that it was not so important for her, because now she could read hidden messages even during the day. The knight clarified that this was what she had discussed with the Lady Fairy, and Adele nodded, telling about her gift given by the fairy. In that case, Hexion assured that he would wait for her. They approached the obelisk. Adele began translating, and Hexion sat down on a stump. But after that, she noticed that he fell asleep. This was understandable. The day had been tiring. When Adele finished, it was completely dark, and Hexion was sleeping. The girl looked at the sleeping knight, who was completely exhausted. Adele also decided to sit down for a couple of minutes. Without realizing it, she was looking at Hexion. Black hair, dark eyes, and black clothes. If you think about it, he is the only one who could become her husband. It was interesting then, during the attack, he came to the rescue. Perhaps he was too late. That terrible moment consumed the girl. There were sounds that she heard before her death. Did he really send someone to help her? Our heroine was so immersed in her memories that she only woke up from his words that she would burn a hole in him in just a little while. He admitted that he is a very light sleeper. Adele said that she had finished deciphering and that they might not return here anymore. After all, their strength was running out. Surprised, he asked if she wasn't disgusted to live in Duke Vita's house. But Adele said that she had no choice. The man simply suggested that she run away. That's what he does sometimes, and the Emperor does not try to stop him, because he knows that he will return for medicine. The girl dreamily said that she would like the same. With fire in his eyes, he said in all seriousness, "Why shouldn't she try?" The guy winked. Now she has such an opportunity, and she won't find a more reliable place than his estate. Adele blushed and wanted to object, but Hexion had already promised to protect her no matter what. It was easy with Hexion, but will their union be the right decision? It was time to go back and, putting her hand in his, The girl mentally said that she wanted to believe him. He was the only one who stood up for her in the dark forest. The girl held a blue velvet bag of money, saying that this should be enough. He said that he needed information. Hexian explained that while he was in the Emperor's power, he was very limited in his actions. Therefore, he needed a reliable spy to monitor the actions of the imperial family. And Adele had such a person in mind. Even though she said so, I really hoped that she wasn't lying. She walked through the crowd with smiles, trying to remember the place. In one of the gateways, she saw a drunken beggar. Dirty children sat on the steps. Nothing had changed since she had been here. The girl pulled up her hood. 10 years had already passed, and she really hoped that the informant was still here. Suddenly, she saw a boy who was staring at her sullenly. It seemed he had been following her from the beginning of the journey. Apparently, he understands other people much better than others. Adele thought that perhaps he was the leader of the gang of local orphans. To his surprise, Adele called out to him, saying she had a couple of questions. The boy began to pull his cap over his face, trying to hide it, and muttered that if she was looking for an exit, it was on the other side. The girl smiled and said that this was not a place where one could accidentally wander. With the air of an adult, the child replied that she didn't think she had any friends here. Adele said that she was looking for someone. Does he by any chance know a guy named Jean? Pressing himself against the wall, the boy replied that he didn't know anyone with that name. Taking out a bag of money, the girl remembered that this guy had a unique eye color. Once you see him, you will remember him forever. Taking the coin, she put it in the boy's hand, saying, "Jin has bright red eyes." The child couldn't take his eyes off the coin with admiration, not yet being completely sure that it was real. And our heroine continued to say that she is Jin's friend. She has business with him. Will no one help her find him? Making it clear that nothing would work out, the boy stated that he definitely could not allow them to meet. The girl begged him to tell Jean that Adele wanted to meet him. Noticing that the boy was looking at the bag, the girl handed him more coins and asked when she could meet her friend. The boy was in complete shock that there were so many coins. After tasting it, he added with admiration that the gold was real. Then the child matter-of-factly told her to come here tomorrow. Jean is not the kind of person you can meet just because you miss her. Looking at this boy, Adele remembered herself as a child when she received a gold coin, and it seemed that the whole world was at her feet. She wondered if he was acting this way because he was looking after other children. Having thrown the bag to the frightened boy, our heroine declared that she could keep all the coins for herself. The boy said that even if she gave everything, she would not be able to see Jin today, and carefully asked why she was giving so much gold. The girl called it a bribe, and the boy, leaving, warned that if Jin didn't answer, he wouldn't come back here. The next day, Adele walked to the same place. This alley was like a labyrinth, and no one could get there without a reason. She hid her face as best she could. Yesterday she was lucky and survived, but today she might not have such luck. She was glad that Karan had not yet returned, but she felt that they would definitely meet today, so she needed to hurry back and get ready. Her young guide was already waiting. Adele greeted him and asked what the outcome was. The boy leaned over the railing and said that Jin had said that he had never had any friends. He looked at the girl, also not believing that she could have anything in common with someone like Jin. Adele tried to calm down. How could she now continue the conversation? Teach that it was impolite to speak like that. Teach that one needs to eat well 3 times a day. Then it dawned on the girl that this person wasn't the one who looked after the stray cats, and the girl shouted out Jean's name loudly. A tall man appeared in front of her. Touching Adele's face, he said that he thought she had been dead for a long time. Bright red eyes looked at Adele, and the man exhaled, which meant she was still alive. The boy's eyes widened as it turned out that this lady and Jean were really friends. Adele looked at Jean, who had grown very tall and rather intimidating, but it was him. Jin also looked closely at his childhood friend. Finally, he resolutely took me by the hand and said that we needed to go somewhere else, explaining that it was too dangerous here, and they needed to find a more suitable place. The girl almost fell and asked Jin not to go so fast. She couldn't keep up with him. To her relief, he slowed his pace and released his grip on her wrist. Looking forward, he clarified that it was better for her now. Smiling, she replied that yes, he was still worried about her. They walked up the stairs. It was quite dark, and the man warned her to step carefully. Considering that they had been walking for about 15 minutes, Adele realized that there was a secret underground passage here. Thanks to the fairy's blessing, she could see perfectly in the dark. But if she got lost here, trouble would be inevitable. Jin seemed to read her thoughts, took her hand, and asked her not to let go of his hand. Adele looked at him submissively. Suddenly, a bright light blinded my eyes. They found themselves in a busy square. The girl was surprised that this was not the center of the capital of the empire. She didn't understand how they got here. When they approached the building, Jin told her to follow him. While they were walking, the girl saw a meeting. Apparently, it was an information guild, a place that is not so easy to get into. Just as she was about to voice this, the guy asked her to remain silent until they got up. Adele assumed that they would come to some kind of dungeon. Jin opened the door to the office, where the guy greeted him with a bow. The owner resolutely walked forward, announced briefly that he had returned with a guest, and ordered tea to be made. The girl simply froze in place because of where they came from and how her childhood friend behaved. When he asked her to sit down, our heroine almost jumped on the spot. She couldn't come to her senses. She imagined everything differently. Suddenly, Jin handed her something soft. Without asking, he began to wrap her up, despite Adele's indignation. He justified this by saying that she was cold, although Adele insisted that she was not at all, and that it was sunny outside. Jin replied seriously that there was no problem with that. Adele was really hot. She asked to cover just her shoulders, and that would be enough for her. The man took note of this and did as she asked. Jin fussed to make Adele comfortable. Finally, the girl touched on the topic of his situation, noting that his status had risen since their last meeting, but Jin indifferently stated that, not really, it was just that the routine had become more and it was boring. Looking at his expression, Adele realized that she still couldn't understand what he was thinking. The guy hadn't changed much. However, if he was given such an office in the Information Guild, then he clearly occupies a high place. While our heroine was thinking that this was exactly the place she needed, Jin seriously said that he really thought she was dead. The girl smiled and replied that she was alive, although a lot had indeed happened to her. Was Jin really looking for her when she disappeared? So she asked him to answer why he decided that she was dead. The guy replied that Cal and Jack told him this. They told about someone drowning, and when they went there to investigate, a crowd of onlookers gathered. Returning a little later, the guard told them that the bodies had already been disposed of, but then they brought Jin a leather bracelet found on the body that he had once given to Adele. That's why he had no choice but to believe them. Jin watched tensely as Adele bent over from this news. He asked what was the matter. Was there something he didn't know? Adele was silent, looking forward and comprehending the information. Jin was waiting for an answer. It turns out he was lied to. The girl straightened up, but remained silent. Folding his arms across his chest, the guy replied that everything was clear. Then he asked to tell what really happened. Gathering her strength, the girl began to quietly tell that Kel and Jack had sold her. They had committed a terrible sin, and then they had also lied to Jin. Adele was frightened by Jin's voice cursing Kel and Jack. The guy's face was distorted with devilish rage. At this time, there was a knock on the door, announcing that the snacks were ready and waiting outside the door. Jin barked at him to leave and get out. The boy obeyed and left the tea and sweets. Jin's scarlet eyes pierced Adele as he tried to control the anger that was overwhelming him and asked her to tell him everything in order. He clarified whether she was sure that those damn bastards had sold her. Adele remembered herself at that moment. Small and scared, they were there at the moment when she was taken away. Then they hung around her all the time. The girl assumed that they were trying to get a good look at her appearance. And then she saw how they received the money. She will never forget how they gagged her and how they laughed when she was kidnapped. Adele wanted to know if they were still alive. Jin grabbed his head upon realizing what he had heard. Then he hoarsely replied that, unfortunately, they had recently died. She wanted to know how exactly. The guy reluctantly said that obviously someone wanted to get even with them. Their mutilated bodies were found. He stood up and said that there was some tea here, but he needed to go and sort out some things. The girl became nervous and asked what happened. Jin explained that he had forgotten something and now it needed to be fixed. He also asked her not to go anywhere, as he would be back soon. Adele took a cup of tea, thinking that she could wait a little. After all, she had business with him. She thought that Jin had forgotten her long ago, but her thoughts were interrupted by Jin, who had already returned. He returned quite quickly and noticed that her plates were empty, and he gave the order to bring her more snacks. Adele tried to make it clear that she was already full. The girl shuddered when a man in a black robe covering his face answered above her ear. He appeared out of nowhere. And if Jin now works with such people, then what kind of person has he become over the past 10 years? But even in her youth, he never ceased to amaze her. His voice interrupted her memories. He wanted to know her story, how she survived all this time. The girl replied that there was nothing special to tell. If she told about their relationship with the Duke, she would break the agreement. Adele urged herself to restrain herself and squeezed out that everything was fine with her now. But Jean said that judging by her eyes and the way she said it, you wouldn't say so. Nervously, she remembered that she would have to leave before sunset. At her word to leave, he exclaimed, his eyes wide open. But where to? Looking away and shivering, Adele replied that she was going home. Where else? The man slammed his fist on the table, angrily declaring that they had just met, but then asked what business she had with him. Adele explained that she needed the help of his guild. She wanted to hire a professional, but now believes there is no need. The girl openly shared that the task was very dangerous, and Jin clarified to what extent. Adele warned that his life would be in danger, to which Jin replied that they were constantly in danger, but our heroine said that this task would be tantamount to treason. Jin's face reflected horror, surprise, and fear at the same time. He didn't understand why she needed all this. He tried to stop her before it was too late, but Adele firmly said that she had already made her decision, and besides, she would have an ally on her side. Jin picked up after hearing about his ally, that it was he who dragged Adele into such recklessness. The girl gently covered his fist with her hand, and replied in a gentle voice that she had made this decision herself. After all, this is the only way she can break the chains that have bound her fate by saying out loud that she wants to become the mistress of her own life. Jin looked at her as if a creature from another planet was sitting in front of him, and not the girl he knew. After some time, he sighed heavily and agreed to meet with her and her ally. Adele beamed with happiness. He offered to walk her home, but Adele said she remembered the way back. The girl gave him a fur scarf, saying that she was very glad to meet him again. Jin said in all seriousness that she could come here whenever she wanted, and that it would be her home too. At first, Adele didn't understand the meaning of his words, but the guy gently touched her face, saying that this had always been her home. In a fit of rage, he said that if only he had known that she was alive, it was clear from his voice that a storm was raging inside him. The girl wanted to ask again what he meant, but the guy looked away. Then he said in simple words, "If she wants to run away or just relax, this is always her home." Our heroine smiled. It was like déjà vu. She thanked her childhood friend with all her sincerity. She was so happy to see him again. Jin looked down and nodded. He was also very glad to see her. They went out to a crowded place, and Adele said goodbye. Without taking his eyes off her, Jin gave the order to follow Adele to make sure she arrived safe and sound. The most important thing is that they don't get caught while being followed. In addition, Jin ordered to find out what Adele had been doing for all these 10 years, but most importantly, that neither the imperial family nor Adele found out about it. The servant in the black robe asked what to do with those they had locked in the basement. Jin wanted to check these things himself, giving the order not to let anyone in until he left there. Adele returned home and carefully made her way to her room, trying to walk as quietly as possible. Apparently, no one was looking for her. The only thing that would await her at dinner was a meeting with Hexion. She slipped past the servants, confident that everyone was in the dining room and that Karan had obviously already returned. The girl leaned against the door in fear, wishing that this dinner would never end. When she entered her room, she saw that there was some kind of bag lying in the middle. It looked like a bag of overripe fruit. Her first thought was, who put it in her room? But then it dawned on her, and she began to breathe heavily. Judging by the shape and the smell of blood, there was no mistake. It was this bastard. To keep from screaming, the girl brought her hands to her mouth. Karan brought this bag again. In her past life, she naively looked inside. He longed to hear her scream in horror. Did he really imagine that it would really hurt her? She touched the bag with disgust. It was very heavy, and she could hardly move it. Opening the door, she put the bag out into the corridor. The door slammed shut, and Adele almost screamed throughout the room. Having closed the door behind her, the girl began to breathe tiredly to calm down. Her plan was to prepare food at dawn, and then wait for Karan to leave the estate. Karan will stay here for 2 weeks, and until then, she must contact Hexion. Since they can't ignore Hexion, she will take advantage of this and buy time. Seeing that her window was not locked, she decided to immediately close it with the help of her magic. Karan is able to not only control flames, but also move objects. Our heroine didn't know if a closed window could stop him, but right now it would be great to have power magic rather than healing magic. Approaching the window, she saw bright white dots in the blue sky. Adele stood as if spellbound and did not take her eyes off them. She sat down at the table, assessing her ability to see in the dark, because now she cannot turn on the light, otherwise she will be discovered. Since she deciphered the inscriptions on the second obelisk in a hurry, her notes were illegible, so she decided to sit down and rewrite everything. I had just started rewriting when I heard footsteps outside the door and a scream. Holding the pen over the inkwell, the girl realized that it seemed Bella had found her gift. Adele closed her eyes tiredly. Bella screamed frantically for the head butler. Adele, sitting on edge, listened, but at some point, everything went quiet. Then the rude shouts and insults towards Bella began, saying that she was a stupid chicken. Why did she open the bag? And Adele realized that writing would not work. The senior maid appeared, and Karan was shouting in a voice that was not his own that he had ordered this to be put in her room. Apparently, Bella was justifying herself by saying she had put it down as he had ordered, but Karan was yelling that he hadn't even seen Adele during the day. after which he started yelling for her to come out. Threats poured in that if she didn't come out, he would knock down the door. The girl really hoped that he wasn't serious and quickly slipped into bed. He started counting to 3. If he didn't come out, he would knock down the door. Bella started getting hysterical. She begged the young gentleman to stop. He was about to endure it when the Duke grabbed his son's hand and asked why he made such a noise at night. Curran stared at his father. The displeased Duke told his son that he was already an adult, and therefore there was no need to behave like a child. But he insisted that Karen hadn't even come down for dinner, and he just wanted to open the door. Adele hid under the blanket. The Duke knocked and asked to open the door, after which he told Karan that she was already asleep. But Karan did not give up. He did not believe that Karen could sleep after such noise. The Duke could not stand it and started shouting that he had had enough. With one glance, he made it clear that that was the end of it. Turning around, he walked down the corridor, saying that they would still be able to see her tomorrow, and he ordered his son to follow him downstairs. And Karan reluctantly agreed, after which he hissed maliciously at the Duke, asking if he really thought he would just follow him, and used magical power to knock down the door. The Duke screamed, but it was already too late. He was standing in Adele's room and was saying in a sarcastic voice who was not sleeping there. The guy brazenly ordered Adele not to pretend to be asleep and teased her. But maybe she was just avoiding him. Our heroine sat up and pretended to be sleepy, saying that she had just woken up. Curran started to get worked up, mimicking her and immediately stating why she wasn't showing her respect. Then he said that the girl had grown up, remembering how before she would have been hunched over and sobbing on the floor. Roughly placing his hand on her head, he asked how she was doing. The girl abruptly removed his hand, ordering him not to touch her while she was in her chambers. Then he would not do whatever he wanted here, while he was recovering from her rebuff, and saying that it was because of that monstrous Duke who proposed to her. His father and servants stood at the entrance and simply remained silent. Adele, without fear in her eyes, calmly looked into his eyes and said that she was tired and told him to leave. Of course, Karan was not going to leave, saying that if he didn't leave, then what would happen? In that case, Adele decided to leave the room herself. The girl ordered Bella to prepare new chambers for her. A frightened Bella stuttered and said that everything would be ready now. Adele shuddered at Karan's voice, which declared that everything was clear. It was just that he had been away from home for so long that she had become unruly. She couldn't move her arms and legs. Karan suddenly extended his hand, calling upon the element of fire. The window was blown out by his force, and the shards scattered throughout the room with a deafening crash. Opening her eyes, she saw fiery threads coming out from the point of interweaving. He enjoyed it all and promised to stop if she begged him for forgiveness. She saw how a ring of fire wrapped around her waist and lifted her up. In the blink of an eye, the girl was thrown up towards the ceiling. Adele was right. Now with her new gift, she saw the essence of Karan's magic. Then, the fairy whispered that she would see in the night as if it were day, and would be able to defeat the wizard. Yes, our heroine began to understand what the fairy was talking about. Seeing the fiery thread, it turned out that it only needed to be cut. The problem was whether she could grab it, but it was worth a try. Reaching out, she tore it off with her hand, and was surprised to find that she was flying down. Karan experienced a real shock, screaming and cursing. He tried to understand why his spell had stopped and what she had just done. Adele, with wide eyes, tried to understand whether it had always been so easy. Karan was getting more and more angry, wondering how this girl could stop his spell. True, she couldn't show the Duke her powers, so that they don't suspect her of anything. She can't trust anyone in this place. So Adele pretended that she herself didn't understand why this happened. Her words calmed the guy down, after which he again created a fiery loop, saying that he would try again. Adele flew up to the ceiling again, calling on herself to stay calm. With a satisfied smile, her tormentor said that it was just an accident. Enjoying his strength and power, he pushed the frightened Adele over the edge of the balcony, demanding her apology. Bella just stood there, deathly pale with her mouth open, and the Duke told Karan what was wrong with him. If she fell, she would break. Adele was hanging on the street in just a nightgown, and the cold penetrated to her bones. Suddenly, Karan looked at her with fear. Our heroine calmly cut his thread, saying that it would be better for her to die, and flew down to the cries of Karan and the Duke that she was crazy. Her thoughts were fragmented, her lungs were filled with water, but her soul was jubilant. She had succeeded. Apparently, she fell into the fountain under the window. Despite her choice, she was glad that she survived. Then she felt herself being dragged. It was Karan who immediately rushed after her. Pulling her out of the fountain, he kept saying what a fool she was. Adele tried to catch her breath and get the water out of her lungs. His hand carefully lay on the girl's shoulder. The guy asked if she was okay and immediately recoiled in horror. Adele screamed at him not to touch and looked at him like a beast. At first he was contorted with anger and wanted to do something to her again. But after a couple of seconds, he opened his eyes and opened his mouth. Adele stood up resolutely. Everything about her was different. There were no tears, no sense of being hunted. The girl's face was unperturbed. Curran was even asking himself who the hell this girl was. Could this really be the same little crybaby who always walked around with her eyes downcast? Adele, breaking into a scream in Curran's face, said that people like him are the worst in the world. He sat there with an expression as if he couldn't believe his eyes. What Adele had just said didn't fit into his perception. After some time, he laughed. Now Adele had to be surprised, and Curran laughed because this girl was able to show such emotions and say such words. So that's what was hidden behind this quiet appearance. Our heroine indignantly asked what was funny about her words. At this time, Bella was running towards her as fast as she could with a blanket in her hands. Adele screamed at her not to dare come near her. The girl had a cry from the soul in which she admitted that she was sick of all of them. How tired she had been of all this for years. Of all of them. The Duke, Curran, and everyone who served them. She was sick of everything in this estate. Now she heard a painfully familiar, indifferent voice asking if she was hurt. Now he calmly said that he could call a doctor if she was hurt. Adele knew that the only thing he cared about was the pawn he would give away to Hexion in the name of his meaningless promise to the Emperor. In that case, she will also follow the role of informing the Duke that she is going to get married. Hearing about the marriage and about Duke Militrio, Curran exclaimed. The Duke, as if summing up, clarified that she had nevertheless decided to accept his proposal, and Adele nodded. The man smiled faintly and said that he was very happy about it. Curran, dumbfounded, asked again what marriage. The Duke closed his eyes tiredly and asked them not to make a noise, reminding them that Curran was no longer a child. He told Adele to go into the house. He would inform her once he had discussed the details of her marriage. The girl resolutely replied that there was no need for this. She stated that she would choose the date and time of her wedding. Before that, she followed his orders, but she would do it herself. Curran still couldn't comprehend what this girl was saying and, with wide eyes, asked her to repeat what she had said. The Duke muttered that ever since she had been at the hunting competition, her behavior had been deplorable and was getting worse and worse. Just think that the lady who would become the wife of the Grand Duke was behaving inappropriately. His look did not bode well, and the Duke himself attributed this shortcoming to the fact that he was too busy and failed to instill good manners. Then he ordered the butler standing behind him to bring a cigar. Bella looked sideways at the gentleman with horror while wrapping up the shivering Adele. The maid begged her mistress to beg her master for mercy, but the Duke ordered everyone to leave except Sebastian, Bella, and Adele. Curran almost burst into flames with a cry. But the Duke made it clear that he should leave. He had something to say. Giving everyone time to leave, he beckoned Adele to him with his hand. Curran just wanted to be indignant, but the Duke ordered the circus to be stopped. Then he turned to Adele, pointed his finger at her, and ordered her to come to dinner the next day. Adele didn't answer, but just looked at him silently. The Duke lifted the girl's chin, addressing Karen Whitty in the tone of a father whose daughter had stopped respecting her parent and who would have to apply punishment. Pressing on her sore spots and enjoying his power, the Duke asked how she was going to get married if there would be scars on her face. What will he say to the Grand Duke who will take her as his wife? Fear flashed in Adele's eyes. He admitted that, although he himself does not know why she hates him, he in turn hates him immensely. But after stroking her head, he approved of the marriage with the Duke and let her talk nonsense. He is glad that she made this decision. If she keeps her mouth shut for the rest of her worthless life, it will be even better. Bella was given the order to take Adele to her old room, lock her in, and feed her as before, twice a day. Our heroine struggled to escape, shaking with hatred, but the Duke reminded her to stop this useless resistance, because without him, she was nothing. He also spoke about her secret absences, which only happened because he closed his eyes. Lighting a cigarette, he said that there was no such thing as Duke Militrio's monster, and ordered the butler to contact him to discuss the wedding preparations. Adele was full of sadness. She was again in this guest room on the second floor. This room was opened only during her punishments. The girl believed that it had never been cleaned. So before, being in the darkness, she could not see everything. But now she saw every speck of dust, and even though anxiety remained in her soul, it was still better than sitting in pitch darkness. In the past, all she could do was cry in a room where she couldn't even see the tip of her nose, and could barely find her bed without bleeding. And then, she greedily devoured the piece of bread that was given to her once every 2 days. So the Duke was right when he said that she hated herself for her own impotence. Why couldn't she follow his instructions? What she should do to earn his forgiveness? It was so bitter that she was such a fool and didn't even blame her tormentor, the man who punished her for no apparent reason. Now she knows the truth, but she still can't get out of here. A feeling of helplessness gnawed at her from within. The servants bowed in greeting to the Duke. He came down to officially receive the guest. Hexion sat in the living room and smiled at the sight of him. The Duke looked with a hateful gaze at the one whom he called an insolent man, but was just a puppet, hiding behind his title. The man walked slowly towards the sofa, his thoughts spinning about how similar the two were. A journey with an unknown end awaited them both. Recalling how much had passed since Adele's imprisonment, he told Hexion that his wife had become noticeably happier since his absence, emphasizing that persistence was certainly good. But didn't the Grand Duke think that he had gone too far? In turn, Hexion shared his observation that the Duchess's actions towards his bride were also excessive. These words made the Duke shudder, which gave Hexion pleasure. Then the Duke changed the subject and began talking about plans for marriage. His plans included sending it to His Majesty the Emperor for approval, but he believed that it would be better to first get engaged and then set an official wedding date. With a smile, Hexion decided on this matter that he needed to ask the lady's wish, as she wanted it. The Duke said that he would ask his daughter about her wishes, and then convey them to the Grand Duke. And again he changed the topic to the wedding date, when Hexion would like to arrange it. To this question, Hexion also replied that he wanted to ask his lady, but the Duke also could not give an answer to what his daughter wanted. He muttered that he would ask his daughter until he met Hexion's direct gaze, which contained mockery. The man noticed that the Grand Duke wanted to tell him something, and the young man thanked him for his attention. The Duke said that he was not good at reading the situation, but if something was bothering Duke Hexion, he should not hesitate to ask. He bluntly remarked that he should discuss all these things with the Duke, and not with his fiancée. And he demanded that his bride be brought here immediately. He did not miss the Duke's concern, as he claimed that his daughter was ill and did not want to leave her room. He argued that Hexion wanted to visit her himself, citing his daughter's refusal to be seen in such a state. He shuddered when he heard the knight's laughter, after which he declared to the bewildered Duke that when he was treated so disrespectfully, it seemed to him that they saw him as a slug. The Duke stared at the guest in fear. Then he said that he was crossing all boundaries. Hexion said that the owner of the house was lying outright, and that if he was going to lie, he should better rehearse his emotions. He also expressed an opinion about the Duke's narrow-mindedness. The maid was shaking from the screams in the living room. The guest was sure that the Duke's daughter was not that old. Hexion, with a piercing mockery, expressed confidence that he knew his lady very well, and, due to her sense of duty, would receive guests even on her deathbed. After all, the knight himself has met a great many liars in his life, and therefore he will never confuse this feeling with anything. And in an absolutely cold tone, he ordered that the bride be brought immediately. The Duke had no choice but to follow his daughter. In turn, Hexion asked that if the girl was really sick, then let her not leave her chambers. He would go up to her. He watched as the Duke began to lie again, saying that women in such a state were the last people who wanted guests. Hexion understood perfectly well that they were trying to send him away. The Duke had to apply eyeliner when the knight began to sing an ode to his love. They agreed that the Duke would return soon. Hexion threw back at the owner of the house that he saw how the Duke was taking care of his daughter. He emphasized with a smile that he had interrupted the conversation and gone to fetch his daughter personally instead of sending servants. The Duke did not fail to reply that she was his youngest child, so he cared about her every step. Hexion agreed that once you look at this girl, you won't be able to take your eyes off her. As he climbed into the room where Adele was locked up, the Duke cursed this bastard who didn't know the rules of etiquette. Now he plays an important role for the Emperor, but after their wedding, the terms of the agreement will be fulfilled, which means the Emperor will limit the power of this bastard. He understood that the date of their engagement should not be delayed. The sooner this wedding was, the sooner he would be able to strengthen the position of their family before the Emperor. However, the man was worried about the unbearable behavior of this girl, and therefore the first thing he was going to do was to return her meek disposition. Approaching the door of the room, he ordered the maid to open it. Adele listened as the lock to her room was opened. The girl saw the Duke in front of her. Our heroine closed her eyes from the bright light coming from the corridor. Seeing her book, he immediately snatched it up, menacingly demanding to know how she had read it, since there wasn't a single source of light here. The girl responded with displeasure that she was simply holding a book in her hands. How could she read anything here? He began to think that this was a reasonable answer. The Duke told her to change her clothes and go downstairs. The Grand Duke had come to see her and wanted to see her. Adele immediately realized that Hexion reads people like an open book, and therefore would immediately realize if something went wrong. The girl understood what she had to do, and told her stunned father that she refused to go out. She stated directly that from now on, she would not budge from her spot at his command. Bella was on the verge of fainting. She was trembling at the mere sight of her master and could not understand how the mistress could not be afraid of him and talk like that.